Chapter 82. The Portrait of Madame. The discussion was becoming full of bitterness. De Guiche perfectly understood the whole matter, for there was in Bragelonne's face a look instinctively hostile, while in that of De Wardes there was something like a determination to offend. Without inquiring into the different feelings which actuated his two friends, de Guiche resolved to ward off the blow which he felt was on the point of being dealt by one of them, and perhaps by both. "Gentlemen," he said, "we must take our leave of each other. I must pay a visit to Monsieur. You, De Wardes, will accompany me to the Louvre, and you, Raoul, will remain here master of the house. And as all that is done here is under your advice, you will bestow the last glance upon my preparations for departure." Raoul, with the air of one who neither seeks nor fears a quarrel, bowed his head in token of assent, and seated himself upon a bench in the sun. "That is well," said de Guiche. "Remain where you are, Raoul, and tell them to show you the two horses I have just purchased. You will give me your opinion, for I only bought them on condition that you ratified the purchase. By the by, I have to beg your pardon for having omitted to inquire after the Comte de la Fere." While pronouncing these latter words, he closely observed De Wardes, in order to perceive what effect the name of Raoul's father would produce upon him. "I thank you," answered the young man. "The Count is very well." A gleam of deep hatred passed into De Wardes' eyes. De Guiche, who appeared not to notice a foreboding expression, went up to Raoul, and grasping him by the hand, said, "It is agreed, then, Bragelonne, is it not, that you will rejoin us in the courtyard of the Palais Royal?" He then signed to De Wardes to follow him, who had been engaged in balancing himself first on one foot, then on the other. "We are going," said he, "come, M. Malicorne." This name made Raoul start, for it seemed that he had already heard it pronounced before, but he could not remember on what occasion. While trying to recall it half dreamily, yet half irritated at his conversation with De Wardes, the three young men set out on their way towards the Palais Royal, where Monsieur was residing. Malicorne learned two things. The first, that the young men had something to say to each other, and the second, that he ought not to walk in the same line with them, and therefore he walked behind. "Are you mad?" said de Guiche to his companion, as soon as they had left the Hotel de Grand Morne. "You attack M. d'Artagnan, and that, too, before Raoul." "Well," said De Wardes, "what then?" "What do you mean by what then?" "Certainly. Is there any prohibition against attacking M. d'Artagnan? But you know very well that M. d'Artagnan was one of those celebrated and terrible for men who were called the Musketeers." "That they may be, but I do not perceive why, on that account, I should be forbidden to hate M. d'Artagnan." "What cause has he given you?" "Me? Personally, none." "Why hate him, therefore?" "Ask my dead father that question." "Really, my dear De Wardes, you surprise me. M. d'Artagnan is not one to leave unsettled any enmity he may have to arrange, without completely clearing his account. Your father, I have heard, on his side, carried matters with a high hand. Moreover, there are no enmities so bitter that they cannot be washed away by blood, by a good sword thrust loyally given. Listen to me, my dear de Guiche. This inveterate dislike existed between my father and M. d'Artagnan, and when I was quite a child, he acquainted me with the reason for it, and, as forming part of my inheritance, I regard it as a particular legacy bestowed upon me. And does his hatred concern M. d'Artagnan alone? As for that, M. d'Artagnan was so intimately associated with his three friends that some portion of the full measure of my hatred falls to their lot, and the hatred is of such a nature, whenever the opportunity occurs, they shall have no occasion to complain of their allowance." De Guiche had kept his eyes fixed on De Wardes, and shuddered at the bitter manner in which the young man smiled. Something like a presentiment flashed across his mind. He knew that the time had passed away for grand coups entered gentilshams, but that the feeling of hatred treasured up in the mind, instead of being diffused abroad, was still hatred all the same, that a smile was sometimes as full of meaning as a threat, and, in a word, that to the fathers who had hated with their hearts and fought with their arms, would now succeed the sons who would indeed hate with their hearts, but would no longer combat their enemies, say by means of intrigue or treachery. As, therefore, It certainly was not Raoul whom he could suspect either of intrigue or treachery. It was on Raoul's account that de Guiche trembled. However, while these gloomy forebodings cast a shade of anxiety over de Guiche's countenance, De Wardes had resumed the entire mastery over himself. At all events, he observed, I have no personal ill will towards M. de Bragelonne. I do not know him even. In any case, said de Guiche, with a certain amount of severity in his tone of voice, do not forget one circumstance, that Raoul is my most intimate friend, a remark at which De Wardes bowed. The conversation terminated there, although de Guiche tried his utmost to draw out his secret from him. But, doubtless, De Wardes had determined to say nothing further, and he remained impenetrable. De Guiche therefore promised himself a more satisfactory result with Raoul. In the meantime they had reached the Palais Royal, which was surrounded by a crowd of lookers-on. The household belonging to Monsieur awaited his command to mount their horses, in order to form part of the escort of the ambassadors, to whom had been entrusted the care of bringing the young princess to Paris. The brilliant display of horses, arms, and rich liveries afforded some compensation in those times, thanks to the kindly feelings of the people and to the traditions of deep devotion to their sovereigns, for the enormous expenses charged upon the taxes. Mazarin had said, let them sing, provided they pay, while Louis XIV's remark was, let them look. Side had replaced the voice. The people could still look, but they were no longer allowed to sing. De Guiche left De Wardes and Malicorne at the bottom of the grand staircase, while he himself, who shared the favor and good graces of Monsieur with the Chevalier de Lorraine, who always smiled at him most affectionately, though he could not endure him, went straight to the prince's apartments, whom he found engaged in admiring himself in the glass and ruining his face. In a corner of the cabinet, the Chevalier de Lorraine was extended full length upon some cushions, having just had his long hair curled, with which he was playing in the same manner a woman would have done. The prince turned round as the count entered, and perceiving who it was, said, Ah, is that you, Guiche? Come here and tell me the truth. You know, my lord, it is one of my defects to speak the truth. You will hardly believe, de Guiche, how that wicked chevalier has annoyed me. The chevalier shrugged his shoulders. Why, he pretends, continued the prince, that Mademoiselle Henrietta is better looking as a woman than I am as a man. Do not forget, my lord, said de Guiche, frowning slightly, you require me to speak the truth. Certainly, said the prince, tremblingly. Well, and I shall tell it you. Do not be in a hurry, Guiche, exclaimed the prince. You have plenty of time. Look at me attentively, and try to recollect Madame. Besides, her portrait is here. Look at it. And he held out to him a miniature of the finest possible execution. De Guiche took it, and looked at it for a long time attentively. Upon my honor, my lord, this is indeed a most lovely face. But look at me, Count, look at me, said the prince, endeavoring to direct upon himself the attention of the count, who was completely absorbed in contemplation of the portrait. It is wonderful, murmured Guiche. Really, one would almost imagine you had never seen the young lady before. It is true, my lord, I have seen her, but it was 5 years ago. There is a great difference between a child 12 years old and a girl of 17. Well, what is your opinion? My opinion is that the portrait must be flattering, my lord. Of that, said the prince triumphantly, there can be no doubt, but let us suppose that it is not. What would your opinion be? My lord, that your highness is exceedingly happy to have so charming a bride. Very well, that is your opinion of her, but of me? My opinion, my lord, is that you are too handsome for a man. The Chevalier de Lorraine burst out laughing. The prince understood how severe towards himself this opinion of the Comte de Guiche was, and he looked somewhat displeased, saying, My friends are not overindulgent. De Guiche looked at the portrait again, and, after lengthened contemplation, returned it with apparent unwillingness, saying, Most decidedly, my lord, I should rather prefer to look 10 times at your highness than to look at Madame once again. It seemed as if the chevalier had detected some mystery in these words, which were incomprehensible to the prince, for he exclaimed, Very well, Get married yourself." Monsieur continued painting himself, and when he had finished, looked at the portrait again once more, turned to admire himself in the glass, and smiled, and no. The Chevalier de Lorraine burst out laughing. "Your Highness knows me too well to believe me capable of so great a disrespect. Besides, I suppose you have something to ask from me before leaving Paris." "Your Highness has indeed guessed correctly, for I have a request to make." "Very good. What is it?" The Chevalier de Lorraine immediately displayed the greatest attention, for he regarded every favor conferred upon another as a robbery committed against himself. And, as Guiche hesitated, the prince said, "If it be money, nothing could be more fortunate, for I am in funds. The superintendent of the finances has sent me 500,000 pistoles. I thank your Highness, but it is not an affair of money." The appointment of a maid of honor. The Chevalier de Lorraine smiled, for he knew very well that nothing displeased a prince more than to show any interest in ladies. "My lord," said the Comte, "it is not I who am directly interested in the lady of whom I have just spoken. I am acting on behalf of one of my friends." "Ah, that is different. What is the name of the young lady in whom your friend is interested?" "Mademoiselle de la Baune Leblanc de la Valliere. She is already maid of honor to the Dowager Princess." "Why, she is lame," said the Chevalier de Lorraine, stretching himself on his cushions. "Lame," repeated the prince, "and Madame to have her constantly before her eyes? Most certainly not. It may be dangerous for her when in an interesting condition." The Chevalier de Lorraine burst out laughing. "Chevalier," said Guiche, "your conduct is ungenerous. While I am soliciting a favor, you do me all the mischief you can." "Forgive me, Comte," said the Chevalier de Lorraine, somewhat uneasy at the tone in which Guiche had made his remark, "but I had no intention of doing so, and I begin to believe that I have mistaken one young lady for another." "There is no doubt of it, monsieur, and I do not hesitate to declare that such is the case." "Do you attach much importance to it, Guiche?" inquired the prince. "I do, my lord." "Well, you shall have it, but ask me for no more appointments, for there are none to give away." "Ah!" exclaimed the Chevalier. "Midday already. That is the hour fixed for the departure." "You dismiss me, monsieur?" inquired Guiche. "Really, Count, you treat me very ill today," replied the Chevalier. "For heaven's sake, Count, for heaven's sake, Chevalier," said Monsieur, "do you not see how you are distressing me?" "Your Highness's signature," said Guiche. "Take a blank appointment from that drawer, and give it to me." Guiche handed the prince the document indicated, and at the same time presented him with a pen already dipped in ink, whereupon the prince signed. "Hey," he said, returning him the appointment, "but I give it on one condition." "Name it." "That you make friends with the Chevalier." "Willingly," said Guiche, and he held out his hand to the Chevalier with an indifference amounting to contempt. "Adieu, Count," said the Chevalier, without seeming in any way to have noticed the Count's slight. "Adieu, and bring us back a princess who will not talk with her own portrait too much." "Yes, set off and lose no time. By the by, who accompany you?" "Bragelonne and De Wardes. Both excellent and fearless companions." "Too fearless," said the Chevalier. "Endeavor to bring them both back, Count." "A bad heart, bad," murmured the Guiche. "He scents mischief everywhere, and sooner than anything else." And taking leave of the prince, he quitted the apartment. As soon as he reached the vestibule, he waved in the air the paper which the prince had signed. Malicorne hurried forward, and received it, trembling with delight. When, however, he held it in his hand, Guiche observed that he still awaited something further. "Patience, monsieur," he said. "The Chevalier de Lorraine was there, and I feared another failure if I asked too much at once. Wait until I return. Adieu." "Adieu, Monsieur le Comte. 1,000 thanks," said Malicorne. "Send Manicamp to me. By the way, monsieur, is it true that Mademoiselle de la Valliere is lame?" As he said this, a horse drew up behind him, and on turning round he noticed that Bragelonne, who had just at that moment entered the courtyard, turned suddenly pale. The poor lover had heard the remark, which, however, was not the case with Malicorne, for he was already beyond the reach of the Count's voice. "Why is Louise's name spoken of here?" said Raoul to himself. "Oh, let not the wards, who stand smiling yonder, even say a word about her in my presence." "Now, gentlemen," exclaimed the Comte de Guiche, "prepare to start." At this moment the prince, who had completed his toilette, appeared at the window, and was immediately saluted by the acclamations of all who composed the escort, and 10 minutes afterwards banners, scarfs, and feathers were fluttering and waving in the air as the cavalcade galloped away. Chapter 83. Havre. Guiche recognized him as much by his dress as by his features, for he had very frequently seen Manicamp in his violet suit, which was his last resource. Manicamp presented himself to the Count under an arch of torches, which set in a blaze, rather than illuminated, the gate by which Havre is entered, and which is situated close to the Tower of Francis I. The Count, remarking the woebegone expression of Manicamp's face, could not resist laughing. "Well, my poor Manicamp," he exclaimed, "how violet you look! Are you in mourning?" "Yes," replied Manicamp, "I am in mourning." "For whom, or for what?" "For my blue and gold suit, which has disappeared, and in the place of which I could find nothing but this, and I was even obliged to economize from compulsion in order to get possession of it." "Indeed? It is singular you should be astonished at that, since you leave me without any money. At all events, here you are, and that is the principal thing. By the most horrible roads. Where are you lodging?" "Lodging? Yes." "I am not lodging anywhere." De Guiche began to laugh. "Well," said he, "where do you intend to lodge?" "In the same place you do. But I don't know, myself." "What do you mean by saying you don't know?" "Certainly. How is it likely I should know where I should stay? Have you not retained an hotel?" "I?" "Yes, you are the prince." "Certainly. There are some very excellent houses." "Well then, but not for us." "What do you mean by saying not for us? For whom, then?" "For the English, of course." "For the English?" "Yes, the houses are all taken." "By whom?" "By the Duke of Buckingham." "I beg your pardon," said Guiche, whose attention this name had awakened. "Yes, by the Duke of Buckingham. His Grace was preceded by a courier, who arrived here 3 days ago, and immediately retained all the houses fit for habitation the town possesses." Come, Manicamp, let us understand each other." "Well, what I have told you is clear enough, it seems to me." "But surely Buckingham does not occupy the whole of Havre." "He certainly does not occupy it, since he has not yet arrived. But, once disembarked, he will occupy it." Oh! It is quite clear you are not acquainted with the English. They have a perfect rage for monopolizing everything." "That may be. But a man who has the whole of one house is satisfied with it, and does not require two." "Yes, but 2 men." "Be it so, for 2 men, 2 houses, or 4 or 6 or 10, if you like. But there are 100 houses at Havre." "Yes, and all the 100 are let." "Impossible." "What an obstinate fellow you are. I tell you Buckingham has hired all the houses surrounding the one which the Queen Dowager of England and the Princess her daughter will inhabit." "He is singular enough, indeed," said the wards, caressing his horse's neck. "Such is the case, however, monsieur." "You are quite sure of it, Monsieur de Manicamp?" And as he put this question, he looked slyly at de Guiche, as though to interrogate him upon the degree of confidence to be placed in his friend's state of mind. During this discussion the night had closed in, and the torches, pages, attendants, squires, horses, and carriages blocked up the gate and the open place. The torches were reflected in the channel, which the rising tide was gradually filling, while on the other side of the jetty might be noticed groups of curious lookers-on, consisting of sailors and townspeople, who seemed anxious to miss nothing of the spectacle. Amidst all this hesitation of purpose, Bragelonne, as though a perfect stranger to the scene, remained on his horse somewhat in the rear of Guiche, and watched the rays of light reflected on the water, inhaling with rapture the sea breezes, and listening to the waves which noisily broke upon the shore and on the beach, tossing the spray into the air with a noise that echoed in the distance. "But," exclaimed de Guiche, "what is Buckingham's motive for providing such a supply of lodgings?" Yes, said de Wardes. "What reason has he?" "A very excellent one," replied Manicamp. "You know what it is. Then—" "I fancy I do." "Tell us then." "Bend your head down towards me." "What? May it not be spoken except in private?" "You shall judge of that yourself." "Very well." De Guiche bent down. "Love," said Manicamp, "I do not understand you at all." "Say rather, you cannot understand me yet." "Explain yourself." "Very well. It is quite certain, Count, that His Royal Highness will be the most unfortunate of husbands." "What do you mean?" "The Duke of Buckingham. It is a name of ill omen to the princes of the House of France. And so the Duke is madly in love with Madame, so the rumor runs, and will have no one approach her but himself." De Guiche colored. Thank you," said he to Manicamp, grasping his hand. Then, recovering himself, added, "Whatever you do, Manicamp, be careful that this project of Buckingham's is not made known to any Frenchman here. For, if so, many a sword will be unsheathed in this country that does not fear English steel." "But after all," said Manicamp, "I have had no satisfactory proof given me of the love in question, and it may be no more than an idle tale." No, said de Guiche, "it must be the truth." And despite his command over himself, he clenched his teeth. "Well," said Manicamp, "after all, what does it matter to you? What does it matter to me whether the prince is to be what the late king was? Buckingham the father for the queen, Buckingham the son for the princess." Manicamp, it is a fact, or at least everybody says so." "Silence," cried the Count. "But why silence?" said de Wardes. "It is a highly creditable circumstance for the French nation. Are not you of my opinion, Monsieur de Bragelonne?" "To what circumstance do you allude?" inquired de Bragelonne with an abstracted air. "That the English should render homage to the beauty of our queens and our princesses." "Forgive me, but I have not been paying attention to what has passed. Will you oblige me by explaining?" "There is no doubt it was necessary that Buckingham the father should come to Paris in order that His Majesty, King Louis XIII, should perceive that his wife was one of the most beautiful women of the French court, and it seems necessary, at the present time, that Buckingham the son should consecrate, by the devotion of his worship, the beauty of a princess who has French blood in her veins. The fact of having inspired a passion on the other side of the Channel will henceforth confer a title to beauty on this." "Sir," replied de Bragelonne, "I do not like to hear such matters treated so lightly. Gentlemen like ourselves should be careful guardians of the honor of our queens and our princesses. If we jest at them, what will our servants do?" "How am I to understand that?" said de Wardes, whose ears tingled at the remark. "In any way you choose, monsieur," replied de Bragelonne, coldly. Bragelonne, murmured de Guiche. "M. de Wardes," exclaimed Manicamp, noticing that the young man had spurred his horse close to the side of Raoul. Gentlemen," said de Guiche, "do not set such an example in public. In the street, too. De Wardes, you are wrong." "Wrong? In what way, may I ask?" "You are wrong, monsieur, because you are always speaking of someone or something," replied Raoul with undisturbed composure. "Be indulgent, Raoul," said de Guiche in an undertone. "Pray do not think of fighting, gentlemen," said Manicamp, "before you have rested yourselves, for in that case you will not be able to do much." "Come," said de Guiche. "Forward, gentlemen," and breaking through the horses and attendants, he cleared the way for himself towards the center of the square, through the crowd, followed by the whole cavalcade. A large gateway looking out upon a courtyard was open. Guiche entered the courtyard, and Brigillon, De Wardes, Manicamp, and 3 or 4 other gentlemen followed him. A sort of council of war was held, and the means to be employed for saving the dignity of the embassy were deliberated upon. Brigillon was of opinion that the right of priority should be respected, while De Wardes suggested that the town should be sacked. This latter proposition appearing to Manicamp rather premature, he proposed instead that they should first rest themselves. This was the wisest thing to do, but, unhappily, to follow his advice, 2 things were wanting, namely, a house and beds. De Guiche reflected for a while, and then said aloud, "Let him who loves me follow me." The attendants also, inquired a page who had approached the group. "Everyone," exclaimed the impetuous young man. "Manicamp, show us the way to the house destined for Her Royal Highness's residence." Without in any way divining the Count's project, his friends followed him, accompanied by a crowd of people whose acclamations and delight seemed a happy omen for the success of that project with which they were yet unacquainted. The wind was blowing strongly from the harbor and moaning in fitful gusts. Chapter 84. At sea. The following day was somewhat calmer, although the gale still continued. The sun had, however, risen through a bank of orange clouds, tinging with its cheerful rays the crests of the black waves, which was impatiently kept from the different lookouts. Towards 11 o'clock in the morning a ship, with sails full set, was signaled as in view. 2 others followed at the distance of about half a knot. They approached like arrows shot from the bow of a skillful archer, and yet the sea ran so high that their speed was as nothing compared to the rolling of the billows in which the vessels were plunging first in one direction and then in another. The English fleet was soon recognized by the line of the ships and by the color of their pennants. The one which had the princess on board and carried the admiral's flag preceded the others. The rumor now spread that the princess was arriving. The whole French court ran to the harbor, while the quays and jetties were soon covered by crowds of people. 2 hours afterwards, the other vessels had overtaken the flagship, and the 3, not venturing perhaps to enter the narrow entrance of the harbor, cast anchor between Havre and La Heve. When the maneuver had been completed, the vessel which bore the admiral saluted France by 12 discharges of cannon, which were returned, discharge for discharge. From Fort Francis immediately afterwards 100 boats were launched. They were covered with the richest stuffs and destined for the conveyance of the different members of the French nobility towards the vessels at anchor. But when it was observed that even inside the harbor the boats were tossed to and fro, and that beyond the jetty the waves rose mountains high, dashing upon the shore with a terrible uproar, it will readily be believed that not one of those frail boats would be able with safety to reach a 4th part of the distance between the shore and the vessels at anchor. A pilot boat, however, notwithstanding the wind and the sea, was getting ready to leave the harbor, for the purpose of placing itself at the admiral's disposal. De Guiche, who had been looking among the different boats for one stronger than the others, which might offer a chance of reaching the English vessels, perceiving the pilot boat getting ready to start, said to Raoul, "Do you not think, Raoul, that intelligent and vigorous men, as we are, ought to be ashamed to retreat before the brute strength of wind and waves?" "That is precisely the very reflection I was silently making to myself," replied Brigillon. "Shall we get into that boat, then, and push off? Will you come, De Wardes?" "Take care, or you will get drowned," said Manicamp. "And for no purpose," said De Wardes, "for with the wind in your teeth, as it will be, you will never reach the vessels." "You refuse, then?" "Assuredly I do. I would willingly risk and lose my life in an encounter against men," he said, glancing at Brigillon. "But as to fighting with oars against waves, I have no taste for that." "And for myself," said Manicamp, "even were I to succeed in reaching the ships, I should not be indifferent to the loss of the only good dress which I have left. Salt water would spoil it." "You, then, refuse also?" exclaimed de Guiche. "Decidedly I do. I beg you to understand it most distinctly." "But," exclaimed de Guiche, "look, De Wardes, look, Manicamp, look yonder. The princesses are looking at us from the poop of the admiral's vessel." "An additional reason," My dear fellow, why we should not make ourselves ridiculous by being drowned while they are looking on. Is that your last word, Manicamp? Yes. And then yours, De Wardes? Yes. Then I'd go alone. Not so, said Raoul, for I shall accompany you. I thought it was understood I should do so. The fact is that Raoul, uninfluenced by devotion, measuring the risk they run, saw how imminent the danger was, but he willingly allowed himself to accept a peril which De Wardes had declined. The boat was about to set off when de Guiche called to the pilot. "Stay," said he. "We want 2 places in your boat." And wrapping 5 or 6 pistoles in paper, he threw them from the quay into the boat. "It seems you are not afraid of salt water, young gentlemen." "We are afraid of nothing," replied de Guiche. "Come along, then." The pilot approached the side of the boat, and the 2 young men, one after the other, with equal vivacity, jumped into the boat. "Courage, my men," said de Guiche. "I have 20 pistoles left in this post, and as soon as we reach the admiral's vessel they shall be yours." The sailors bent themselves to their oars, and the boat bounded over the crest of the waves. The interest taken in this hazardous expedition was universal. The whole population of Havre hurried towards the jetties, and every look was directed towards the little bark. At one moment it flew suspended on the crest of the foaming waves, then suddenly glided downwards towards the bottom of a raging abyss, where it seemed utterly lost. At the expiration of an hour's struggling with the waves, it reached the spot where the admiral's vessel was anchored, and from the side of which 2 boats had already been dispatched towards their aid. Upon the quarter-deck of the flagship, sheltered by a canopy of velvet and ermine, which was suspended by stout supports, Henrietta, the Queen Dowager, and the young princess, with the admiral, the Duke of Norfolk, standing beside them, watched with alarm this slender bark, at one moment tossed to the heavens, and the next buried beneath the waves, and against whose dark sail the noble figures of the 2 French gentlemen stood forth in relief like 2 luminous apparitions. Respect, and yet more, a certain apprehension, for which it could not account, had hitherto restrained the Comte de Guiche from looking at Madame attentively, who, however, had observed him immediately and had asked her mother, "Is not that monsieur in the boat yonder?" Madame Henrietta, who knew monsieur better than her daughter did, smiled at the mistake her vanity had led her into, and had answered, "No, it is only Anne de Guiche, his favorite." The princess, at this reply, was constrained to check an instinctive tenderness of feeling which the courage displayed by the Count had awakened. At the very moment the princess had put this question to her mother, de Guiche had, at last, summoned courage to raise his eyes towards her, and could compare the original with the portrait he had so lately seen. No sooner had he remarked her pale face, her eyes so full of animation, her beautiful nut-brown hair, her expressive lips, and her every gesture, which, while betokening royal descent, seemed to thank and encourage him at one and the same time, than he was, for a moment, so overcome that, had it not been for Raoul, on whose arm he leant, he would have fallen. His friend's amazed look, and the encouraging gesture of the Queen, restored Guiche to his self-possession. In a few words he explained his mission, explained in what way he had become the envoy of His Royal Highness, and saluted, according to their rank in the reception they gave him, the admiral and several of the English noblemen who were grouped around the princesses. Raoul was then presented, and was most graciously received. The share that the Comte de la Fere had had in the restoration of Charles II was known to all, and, more than that, it was the Comte who had been charged with the negotiation of the marriage, by means of which the granddaughter of Henry IV was now returning to France. Raoul spoke English perfectly, and constituted himself his friend's interpreter with the young English noblemen, who were indifferently acquainted with the French language. At this moment a young man came forward, of extremely handsome features, and whose dress and arms were remarkable for their extravagance of material. He approached the princesses, who were engaged in conversation with the Duke of Norfolk, and, in a voice which concealed his impatience, said, "It is time now to disembark, Your Royal Highness." The younger of the princesses rose from her seat at this remark, and was about to take the hand which the young nobleman extended to her, with an eagerness which arose from a variety of motives, when the admiral intervened between them, observing, "A moment, if you please. My lord, it is not possible for ladies to disembark just now. The sea is too rough. It is probable the wind may abate before sunset, and the landing will not be effected. Therefore, until this evening." "Allow me to observe, my lord," said Buckingham, with an irritation of manner which he did not seek to disguise. "You detain these ladies, and you have no right to do so. One of them, unhappily, now belongs to France, and you perceive that France claims them by the voice of her ambassadors." And at the same moment he indicated Raoul and Guiche, whom he saluted. "I cannot suppose that these gentlemen intend to expose the lives of their royal highnesses," replied the admiral. "These gentlemen," retorted Buckingham, "arrived here safely, notwithstanding the wind. Allow me to believe that the danger will not be greater for their royal highnesses when the wind will be in their favor." Madame glanced at the Comte de Guiche, and perceived that his face was burning with confusion. This look had escaped Buckingham, who had eyes for nothing but Norfolk, of whom he was evidently very jealous. He seemed anxious to remove the princesses from the deck of a vessel where the admiral reigned supreme. "In that case," returned Buckingham, "I appeal to Madame herself." "And I, my lord," retorted the admiral, "I appeal to my own conscience and to my own sense of responsibility. I have undertaken to convey Madame safe and sound to France, and I shall keep my promise." "But, sir," continued Buckingham, "my lord, permit me to remind you that I command here." "Are you aware what you are saying, my lord?" replied Buckingham, haughtily. "Perfectly so. I therefore repeat it. I alone command here. All yield obedience to me. The sea and the winds, the ships and men too." This remark was made in a dignified and authoritative manner. Raoul observed its effect upon Buckingham, who trembled with anger from head to foot, and leaned against one of the poles of the tent to prevent himself falling. His eyes became suffused with blood, and the hand which he did not need for his support wandered towards the hilt of his sword. "My lord," said the Queen, "permit me to observe that I agree in every particular with the Duke of Norfolk. If the heavens, instead of being clouded as they are at the present moment, were perfectly serene and propitious, we can still afford to bestow a few hours upon the officer who has conducted us so successfully and with such extreme attention to the French coast, where he is to take leave of us." Buckingham, instead of replying, seemed to seek counsel from the expression of Madame's face. She, however, half concealed beneath the thick curtains of the velvet and gold which sheltered her, had not listened to the discussion, having been occupied in watching the Comte de Guiche, who was conversing with Raoul. This was a fresh misfortune for Buckingham, who fancied he perceived in Madame Henrietta's look a deeper feeling than that of curiosity. He withdrew, almost tottering in his gait, and nearly stumbled against the mainmast of the ship. "The Duke has not acquired a steady footing yet," said the Queen Mother, in French, "and that may possibly be his reason for wishing to find himself on firm land again." The young man overheard this remark, turned suddenly pale, and, letting his hands fall in great discouragement by his side, drew aside, mingling in one sigh his old affection and his new hatreds. The admiral, however, without taking any further notice of the Duke's ill humor, led the princesses into the quarter-deck cabin, where dinner had been served with a magnificence worthy in every respect of his guests. The admiral seated himself at the right hand of the princess, and placed the Comte de Guiche on her left. This was the place Buckingham usually occupied, and when he entered the cabin, how profound was his unhappiness to see himself banished by etiquette from the presence of his sovereign, to a position inferior to that which, by rank, he was entitled to. De Guiche, on the other hand, paler still perhaps from happiness than his rival was from anger, seated himself tremblingly next the princess, whose silken robe, as it lightly touched him, caused a tremor of mingled regret and happiness to pass through his whole frame. And saying this, he presented his hand to Madame Henrietta with such marked deference, and at the same time with a nobleness of mien so intrepid, that a murmur of admiration rose from the English, whilst a groan of despair escaped from Buckingham's lips. Raoul, who loved, comprehended it all, He fixed upon his friend one of those profound looks which a bosom friend or mother can alone extend, either as protector or guardian, over the one who was about to stray from the right path. Towards 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun shone forth anew, the wind subsided, the sea became smooth as a crystal mirror, and the fog, which had shrouded the coast, disappeared like a veil withdrawn from before it. The smiling hills of France appeared in full view, with their numerous white houses rendered more conspicuous by the bright green of the trees or the clear blue sky. Chapter 85. The tents. The admiral, as we have seen, was determined to pay no further attention to Buckingham's threatening glances and fits of passion. In fact, from the moment they quitted England, he had gradually accustomed himself to his behavior. De Guiche had not yet in any way remarked the animosity which appeared to influence that young nobleman against him, but he felt, instinctively, that there could be no sympathy between himself and the favourite of Charles II. The Queen Mother, with greater experience and calmer judgment, perceived the exact position of affairs, and, as she discerned its danger, was prepared to meet it whenever the proper moment should arrive. Quiet had been everywhere restored, except in Buckingham's heart. He, in his impatience, addressed himself to the princess in a low tone of voice. "For heaven's sake, madam, I implore you to hasten your disembarkation. Do you not perceive how the insolent Duke of Norfolk is killing me with his attentions and devotions to you?" Henrietta heard this remark. She smiled, and without turning her head towards him, but giving only to the tone of her voice that inflection of gentle reproach and languid impertinence, which women and princesses so well know how to assume, she murmured, "I have already hinted, my lord, that you must have taken leave of your senses." Not a single detail escaped Raoul's attention. He heard both Buckingham's entreaty and the princess's reply. He remarked Buckingham retire, heard his deep sigh, and saw him pass his hand across his face. He understood everything, and trembled as he reflected on the position of affairs and the state of the minds of those about him. At last the admiral, with studied delay, gave the last orders for the departure of the boats. Buckingham heard the directions given with such an exhibition of delight that a stranger would really imagine the young man's reason was affected. As the Duke of Norfolk gave his commands, a large boat or barge, decked with flags, and capable of holding about 20 rowers and 15 passengers, was slowly lowered from the side of the admiral's vessel. The barge was carpeted with velvet and decorated with coverings embroidered with the arms of England and with garlands of flowers. For, at that time, ornamentation was by no means forgotten in these political pageants. No sooner was this really royal boat afloat and the rowers with oars uplifted, awaiting, like soldiers presenting arms, the embarkation of the princess, then Buckingham ran forward to the ladder in order to take his place. His progress was, however, arrested by the Queen. "My lord," she said, "it is hardly becoming that you should allow my daughter and myself to land without having previously ascertained that our apartments are properly prepared. I beg your lordship to be good enough to precede us ashore, and to give directions that everything be in proper order on our arrival." This was a fresh disappointment for the Duke, and still more so, since it was so unexpected. He hesitated, colored violently, but could not reply. He had thought he might be able to keep near Madame during the passage to the shore, and, by this means, to enjoy to the very last moment the brief period fortune still reserved for him. The order, however, was explicit, and the admiral, who heard it given, immediately called out, "Launch the ship's gig." His directions were executed with that celerity which distinguishes every maneuver on board a man-of-war. Buckingham, in utter hopelessness, cast a look of despair at the princess, of supplication towards the queen, and directed a glance full of anger towards the admiral. The princess pretended not to notice him, while the queen turned aside her head, and the admiral laughed outright, at the sound of which Buckingham seemed ready to spring upon him. The Queen Mother rose, and with a tone of authority said, "Pray set off, sir." The young Duke hesitated, looked around him, and with a last effort, half choked by contending emotions, said, "And you, gentlemen, M. de Guiche and M. de Brigillon, do not you accompany me?" De Guiche bowed and said, "Both M. de Bragillon and myself await Her Majesty's orders. Whatever the command she imposes on us, we shall obey them." Saying this, He looked towards the princess, who cast down her eyes. "Your grace will remember," said the queen, "that M. de Guiche is here to represent monsieur. It is he who will do the honors of France, as you have done those of England. His presence cannot be dispensed with. Besides, we owe him this slight favor for the courage he displayed in venturing to seek us in such a terrible stress of weather." Buckingham opened his lips as if he were about to speak, but whether thoughts or expressions failed him, not a syllable escaped them, and turning away, as though out of his mind, he leapt from the vessel into the boat. The sailors were just in time to catch hold of him to steady themselves, for his weight and the rebound had almost upset the boat. "His grace cannot be in his senses," said the admiral aloud to Raoul. "I am uneasy on the Duke's account," replied Bragelonne. While the boat was advancing towards the shore, the Duke kept his eyes immovably fixed upon the admiral's ship, like a miser torn away from his coffers, or a mother separated from a child about to be led away to death. No one, however, acknowledged his signals, his frowns, or his pitiful gestures. In very anguish of mind, he sank down in the boat, burying his hands in his hay, whilst the boat, impelled by the exertions of the merry sailors, flew over the waves. On his arrival, he was in such a state of apathy that, had he not been received at the harbor by the messenger whom he had directed to precede him, he would hardly have had strength to ask his way. Having once, however, reached the house which had been set apart for him, he shut himself up like Achilles in his tent. The barge bearing the princesses quitted the admiral's vessel at the very moment Buckingham landed. It was followed by another boat filled with officers, courtiers, and zealous friends. Great numbers of the inhabitants of Havre, having embarked in fishing cobles and boats of every description, set off to meet the royal barge. The cannon from the forts fired salutes, which were returned by the flagship and the two other vessels, and the flashes from the open mouths of the cannon floated in white fumes over the waves and disappeared in the clear blue sky. The princess landed at the decorated quay. Bands of gay music greeted her arrival and accompanied her every step she took. During the time she was passing through the center of the town and treading beneath her delicate feet the richest carpets and the gayest flowers, which had been strewn upon the ground, de Guiche and Raoul, escaping from their English friends, hurried through the town and hastened rapidly towards the place intended for the residence of Madame. "Let us hurry forward," said Raoul to de Guiche, "for if I read Buckingham's character aright, he will create some disturbance when he learns the result of our deliberations of yesterday." "Never fear," said de Guiche. "De Wardes is there, who is determination itself, while Manicamp is the very personification of artless gentleness." De Guiche was not, however, the less diligent on that account, and 5 minutes afterwards they were within sight of the Hôtel de Ville. The first thing which struck them was the number of people assembled in the square. "Excellent," said de Guiche. "Our apartments, I see, are prepared." In fact, in front of the Hôtel de Ville, upon the wide open space before it, 8 tents had been raised, surmounted by the flags of France and England united. The hotel was surrounded by tents, as by a girdle of variegated colors. 10 pages and a dozen mounted troopers, who had been given to the ambassadors, for an escort, mounted guard before the tents. It had a singularly curious effect, almost fairy-like in its appearance. These tents had been constructed during the night time, fitted up, within and without, with the richest materials that de Guiche had been able to procure in Havre. They completely encircled the Hôtel de Ville. The only passage which led to the steps of the hotel, and which was not enclosed by the silken barricade, was guarded by 2 tents, resembling 2 pavilions, the doorways of both of which opened towards the entrance. These 2 tents were destined for de Guiche and Raoul, in whose absence they were intended to be occupied, that of de Guiche by de Wardes, and that of Raoul by Manicamp. Surrounding these 2 tents, and the 6 others, 100 officers, gentlemen, and pages, dazzling in their display of silk and gold, thronged like bees buzzing about a hive. Every one of them, their swords by their sides, was ready to obey the slightest sign either of de Guiche or Bragelonne, the leaders of the embassy. At the very moment the 2 young men appeared at the end of one of the streets leading to the square, they perceived, crossing the square at full gallop, a young man on horseback, whose costume was of surprising richness. He pushed hastily through the crowd of curious lookers-on, and, at the sight of these unexpected erections, uttered a cry of anger and dismay. It was Buckingham, who had awakened from his stupor, in order to adorn himself with a costume perfectly dazzling from its beauty, and to await the arrival of the princess and the queen mother at the Hotel de Ville. At the entrance to the tents, the soldiers barred his passage, and his further progress was arrested. Buckingham, hopelessly infuriated, raised his whip, but his arm was seized by a couple of officers. Of the two guardians of the tent, only one was there. De Wardes was in the interior of the Hotel de Ville, engaged in attending to the execution of some orders given by de Guiche. At the noise made by Buckingham Manicamp, who was indolently reclining upon the cushions at the doorway of one of the tents, rose with his usual indifference, and, perceiving that the disturbance continued, made his appearance from underneath the curtains. "What is the matter?" he said, in a gentle tone of voice. "And who is it making this disturbance?" It so happened that, at the moment he began to speak, silence had just been restored, and, although his voice was very soft and gentle in its tone, every one heard his question. Buckingham turned round, and looked at the tall, thin figure and the listless expression of countenance of his questioner. Probably the personal appearance of Manicamp, who was dressed very plainly, did not inspire him with much respect, for he replied disdainfully, "Who may you be, monsieur?" Manicamp, leaning on the arm of a gigantic trooper, as firm as the pillar of a cathedral, replied in his usual tranquil tone of voice, "And you, monsieur?" "I, monsieur, am the Duke of Buckingham. I have hired all the houses which surround the Hotel de Ville, where I have business to transact, and as these houses are let, they belong to me, and, as I hired them in order to preserve the right of free access to the Hotel de Ville, you are not justified in preventing me passing to it." "But who prevents you passing, monsieur?" inquired Manicamp. "Your sentinels. Because you wish to pass on horseback, and orders have been given to let only persons on foot pass." "No one has any right to give orders here, except myself," said Buckingham. "On what grounds?" inquired Manicamp, with his soft tone. "Will you do me the favor to explain this enigma to me?" "Because, as I have already told you, I have hired all the houses looking on the square." "We are very well aware of that, since nothing but the square itself has been left for us." "You are mistaken, monsieur. The square belongs to me, as well as the houses in it." "I have already asked you who you are, monsieur," exclaimed Buckingham, exasperated at the coolness of his interlocutor. "My name is Manicamp," replied the young man, in a voice whose tones were as harmonious and sweet as the notes of an Aeolian harp. Buckingham shrugged his shoulders contemptuously and said, "When I hired these houses which surround the Hotel de Ville, the square was unoccupied. These barracks obstruct my sight. I hereby order them to be removed." A hoarse and angry murmur ran through the crowd of listeners at these words. De Guiche arrived at this moment. He pushed through the crowd which separated him from Buckingham, and, followed by Raoul, arrived on the scene of action from one side, just as De Wardes came up from the other. "Pardon me, my lord, but if you have any complaint to make, have the goodness to address it to me, inasmuch as it was I who supplied the plans for the construction of these tents. Moreover, I would beg you to observe, monsieur, that the term barrack is a highly objectionable one," added Manicamp, graciously. "You were saying, monsieur," continued de Guiche. "I was saying, monsieur le comte," resumed Buckingham, in a tone of anger more marked than ever, although in some measure moderated by the presence of an equal. "I was saying that it is impossible these tents can remain where they are." "Impossible!" exclaimed de Guiche. "And why?" "Because I object to them." A movement of impatience escaped de Guiche, but a warning glance from Raoul restrained him. "You should the less object to them, monsieur, on account of the abuse of priority you have permitted yourself to exercise." "Abuse?" "Most assuredly. You commission a messenger, who hires in your name the whole of the town of Havre, without considering the members of the French court, who would be sure to arrive here to meet Madame. Your Grace will admit that this is hardly friendly conduct in the representative of a friendly nation." The right of possession belongs to him who is first on the ground. Not in France, monsieur. Why not in France? Because France is a country where politeness is observed. Which means, exclaimed Buckingham, in so violent a manner that those who were present drew back, expecting an immediate collision. Which means, monsieur, replied de Guiche, now rather pale, that I cause these tents to be raised as habitations for myself and my friends, as a shelter for the ambassadors of France, as the only place of refuge which your exactions have left us in the town, and that I and those who are with me shall remain in them, at least, until an authority more powerful and more supreme than your own shall dismiss me from them. In other words, until we are ejected, as the lawyers say, observed Manicamp blandly. I know an authority, monsieur, which I trust is such as you will respect, said Buckingham, placing his hand on his sword. At this moment, and as the goddess of discord, inflaming all minds, was about to direct their swords against each other, Raoul gently placed his hand on Buckingham's shoulder. One word, my lord, he said. My right, my right. First of all, exclaimed the fiery young man, it is precisely upon that point I wish to have the honor of addressing a word to you. Very well, monsieur, but let your remarks be brief. One question is all I ask. You can hardly expect me to be briefer. Speak, monsieur, I am listening. Are you, or is the Duke of Orleans, going to marry the granddaughter of Henry IV? What do you mean? Exclaimed Buckingham, retreating a few steps, bewildered. Have the goodness to answer me, persisted Raoul, tranquilly. Do you mean to ridicule me, monsieur? Inquired Buckingham. Your question is a sufficient answer for me. You admit, then, that it is not you who are going to marry the princess. Thou know it perfectly well, monsieur, I should imagine. I beg your pardon, but your conduct has been such as to leave it not altogether certain. Proceed, monsieur. What do you mean to convey? Raoul approached the Duke. Are you aware, my lord, he said, lowering his voice, that your extravagances very much resemble the excesses of jealousy? These jealous fits, with respect to any woman, are not becoming in one who is neither her lover nor husband, and I am sure you will admit that my remark applies with still greater force when the lady in question is a princess of the blood royal. Monsieur, exclaimed Buckingham, do you mean to insult Madame Henrietta? Be careful, my lord, replied Bragelonne, coldly, for it is you who insult her. A little while since, when on board the Admiral's ship, you wearied the Queen and exhausted the Admiral's patience. I was observing, my lord, and, at first, I concluded you were not in possession of your senses, but I have since surmised the real significance of your madness. Monsieur, exclaimed Buckingham, one moment more, for I have yet another word to add. I trust one am the only one of my companions who has guessed it. Are you aware, monsieur, said Buckingham, trembling with mingled feelings of anger and uneasiness, are you aware that you are holding language towards me which requires to be checked? Weigh your words well, my lord, said Raoul haughtily. My nature is not such that its vivacities need checking, whilst you, on the contrary, are descended from a race whose passions are suspected by all true Frenchmen. I repeat, therefore, for the second time, be careful. Careful of what, may I ask? Do you presume to threaten me? I am the son of the Comte de la Fere, my lord, and I never threaten, because I strike first. Therefore, understand me well. The threat that I hold out to you is this. Buckingham clenched his hands, but Raoul continued, as though he had not observed the gesture. At the very first word, beyond the respect and deference due to her royal highness, which you permit yourself to use towards her, be patient, my lord, for I am perfectly so. You? Undoubtedly. So long as Madame remained on English territory, I held my peace. But from the very moment she stepped on French ground, and now that we have received her in the name of the prince, I warn you that at the first mark of disrespect which you, in your insane attachment, exhibit towards the royal house of France, I shall have one of two courses to follow. Either I declare, in the presence of everyone, the madness with which you are now affected, and I get you ignominiously ordered back to England. Or if you prefer it, I will run my dagger through your throat in the presence of all here. This second alternative seems to me the least disagreeable, and I think I shall hold to it." Buckingham had become paler than the lace collar around his neck. "M. de Bragelonne," he said, "is it, indeed, a gentleman who is speaking to me?" "Yes, only the gentleman is speaking to a madman. Get cured, my lord, and he will hold quite another language to you." "But, M. de Bragelonne," murmured the Duke, in a voice half-choked, and putting his hand to his neck, "do you not see I am choking?" "If your death were to take place at this moment, my lord," replied Raoul with unruffled composure, "I should, indeed, regard it as a great happiness, for the circumstance would prevent all kinds of evil remarks, not alone about yourself, but also about those illustrious persons whom your devotion is compromising in so absurd a manner." You are right," said the young man, almost beside himself. Yes, better to die than to suffer as I do at this moment." And he grasped a beautiful dagger, the handle of which was inlaid with precious stones, and which he half drew from his breast. Raoul thrust his hand aside. "Be careful what you do," he said. "If you do not kill yourself, you commit a ridiculous action, and if you were to kill yourself, you sprinkle blood upon the nuptial robe of the Princess of England." Buckingham remained a minute gasping for breath. During this interval, his lips quivered, his fingers worked convulsively, and his eyes wandered as though in delirium. Then suddenly, he said, "M. de Bragelonne, I know nowhere a nobler mind than yours. You are, indeed, a worthy son of the most perfect gentleman that ever lived. Keep your tents." And he threw his arms round Raoul's neck. All who were present, astounded at this conduct, which was the very reverse of what was expected, considering the violence of the one adversary and the determination of the other, began immediately to clap their hands, and 1,000 cheers and joyful shouts arose from all sides. De Guiche, in his turn, embraced Buckingham somewhat against his inclination, but, at all events, he did embrace him. This was the signal for French and English to do the same, and they who, until that moment, had looked at each other with restless uncertainty, fraternized on the spot. In the meantime, the procession of the princess arrived, and had it not been for Bragelonne, 2 armies would have been engaged together in conflict, and blood had been shed upon the flowers with which the ground was covered. At the appearance, however, of the banners borne at the head of the procession, complete order was restored. Chapter 86. Night. Concord returned to its place amidst the tents. English and French rivaled each other in their devotion and courteous attention to the illustrious travelers. The English forwarded to the French baskets of flowers, of which they had made a plentiful provision to greet the arrival of the young princess. The French, in return, invited the English to a supper, which was to be given the next day. Congratulations were poured in upon the princess everywhere during her journey. From the respect paid her on all sides, she seemed like a queen, and from the adoration with which she was treated by 2 or 3, she appeared an object of worship. The Queen Mother gave the French the most affectionate reception. France was a native country, and she had suffered too much unhappiness in England for England to have made her forget France. She taught her daughter, then, by her own affection for it, that love for a country where they had both been hospitably received, and where a brilliant future opened before them. After the public entry was over, and the spectators in the streets had partially dispersed, and the sound of the music and cheering of the crowd could be heard only in the distance, when the night had closed in, wrapping with its star-covered mantle the sea, the harbor, the town, and surrounding country, de Guiche, still excited by the great events of the day, returned to his tent, and seated himself upon one of the stools with so profound an expression of distress that Bragelonne kept his eyes fixed on him until he heard him sigh, and then he approached him. The Count had thrown himself back on his seat, leaning his shoulders against the partition of the tent, and remained thus, his face buried in his hands, with heaving chest and restless limbs. "You are suffering?" asked Raoul. "Cruelly." "Bodily, I suppose?" "Yes, bodily." "This has indeed been a harassing day," continued the young man, his eyes fixed upon his friend. "Yes, A night's rest will probably restore me. Shall I leave you? No, I wish to talk to you. You shall not speak to me, Guiche, until you have first answered my questions. Proceed then. You will be frank with me. I always am. Can you imagine why Buckingham has been so violent? I suspect. Because he is in love with Madame, is it not? One could almost swear to it, to observe him. You are mistaken. There is nothing of the kind. It is you who are mistaken. Raoul, I have read his distress in his eyes, in his every gesture and action the whole day. You are a poet, my dear Count, and fine subject for your muse everywhere. I can perceive love clearly enough. Where it does not exist. Nay, where it does exist. Do you not think you are deceiving yourself, Guiche? I am convinced of what I say, said the Count. Now, inform me, Count, said Raoul, fixing a penetrating look upon him. What has happened to render you so clear-sighted? Guiche hesitated for a moment, and then answered, Self-love, I suppose. Self-love is a pedantic word, Guiche. What do you mean? I mean that, generally, you are less out of spirits than seems to be the case this evening. I am fatigued. Listen to me, Guiche. We have been campaigners together. We have been on horseback for 18 hours at a time, and our horses dying from exhaustion or hunger have fallen beneath us, and yet we have laughed at our mishaps. Believe me, it is not fatigue that saddens you tonight. It is annoyance. Then, what annoyance? That of this evening. The mad conduct of the Duke of Buckingham. Do you mean? Of course. Is it not vexatious for us, the representatives of our sovereign master, to witness the devotion of an Englishman to our future mistress, the second lady in point of rank in the kingdom? Yes, you are right, but I do not think any danger is to be apprehended from Buckingham. No, still he is intrusive. Did he not, on his arrival here, almost succeed in creating a disturbance between the English and ourselves? And, had it not been for you, for your admirable prudence, for your singular decision of character, swords would have been drawn in the very streets of the town. You observe, however, that he has changed his tactics. Yes, certainly, but this is the very thing that amazes me so much. You spoke to him in a low tone of voice. What did you say to him? You think he loves her. You admit that such a passion does not give way readily. He does not love her. Then, de Guiche pronounced the latter with so marked an expression that Raoul raised his head. The noble character of the young man's countenance expressed a displeasure which could easily be read. What I said to him, Count, replied Raoul, I will repeat to you. Listen to me. I said, you are regarding with wistful feelings and most injurious desire the sister of your prince, her to whom you are not affianced, who can never be anything to you. You are outraging those who, like ourselves, have come to seek a young lady to escort her to her husband. You spoke to him in that manner, asked Guiche, coloring. In those very terms, I even added more. How would you regard us? I said, if you were to perceive among us a man mad enough, disloyal enough, to entertain other than sentiments of the most perfect respect for a princess who is the destined wife of our master. These words were so applicable to de Guiche that he turned pale, and, overcome by a sudden agitation, was barely able to stretch out one hand mechanically towards Raoul, as he covered his eyes and face with the other. But, continued Raoul, not interrupted by this movement of his friend, heaven be praised, the French who were pronounced to be thoughtless and indiscreet, reckless, even, are capable of bringing a calm and sound judgment to bear on matters of such high importance. I added even more, for I said, learn, my lord, that we gentlemen of France devote ourselves to our sovereigns by sacrificing for them our affections, as well as our fortunes and our lives. And whenever it may chance to happen that the tempter suggests one of those vile thoughts that set the heart on fire, we extinguish the flame, even if it has to be done by shedding our blood for the purpose. Thus it is that the honor of three is saved, our country's, our master's, and our own. It is thus that we act, your grace. It is thus that every man of honor ought to act. In this manner, my dear Duiche, continued Raoul, I addressed the Duke of Buckingham, and he admitted I was right, and resigned himself unresistingly to my arguments. De Guiche, who had hitherto sat leaning forward while Raoul was speaking, drew himself up, his eyes glancing proudly. He seized Raoul's hand. His face, which had been as cold as ice, seemed on fire. "And you spoke magnificently," he said, in a half-choked voice. "You are indeed a friend, Raoul. But now, I entreat you, leave me to myself." "Do you wish it?" "Yes, I need repose. Many things have agitated me today, both in mind and body. When you return tomorrow, I shall no longer be the same man." "I leave you, then," said Raoul, as he withdrew. The Count advanced a step towards his friend and pressed him warmly in his arms. But in this friendly pressure Raoul could detect the nervous agitation of a great internal conflict. The night was clear, starlit, and splendid. The tempest had passed away, and the sweet influences of the evening had restored life, peace, and security everywhere. A few fleecy clouds were floating in the heavens, and indicated from their appearance a continuance of beautiful weather, tempered by a gentle breeze from the east. Upon the large square in front of the hotel, the shadows of the tents, intersected by the golden moonbeams, formed as it were a huge mosaic of jet and yellow flagstones. Soon, however, the entire town was wrapped in slumber. A feeble light still glimmered in Madame's apartment, which looked out upon the square, and the soft rays from the expiring lamp seemed to be the image of the calm sleep of a young girl, hardly yet sensible of life's anxieties, and in whom the flame of existence sinks placidly as sleep steals over the body. Bragelonne quitted the tent with the slow and measured step of a man curious to observe, but anxious not to be seen. Sheltered behind the thick curtains of his own tent, embracing with a glance the whole square, he noticed that, after a few moments' pause, the curtains of De Guiche's tent were agitated, and then drawn partially aside. Behind them he could perceive the shadow of De Guiche, his eyes glittering in the obscurity, fastened ardently upon the princess's sitting apartment, which was partially lighted by the lamp in the inner room. The soft light which illumined the windows was the Count's star. The fervent aspirations of his nature could be read in his eyes. Raoul, concealed in the shadow, divined the many passionate thoughts that established, between the tent of the young ambassador and the balcony of the princess, a mysterious and magical bond of sympathy, a bond created by thoughts imprinted with so much strength and persistence of will, that they must have caused happy and loving dreams to alight upon the perfumed couch, which the Count, with the eyes of his soul, devoured so eagerly. But De Guiche and Raoul were not the only watchers. The window of one of the houses looking on the square was open to the casement of the house where Buckingham resided. By the aid of the rays of light which issued from this latter, the profile of the Duke could be distinctly seen, as he indolently reclined upon the carved balcony with its velvet hangings. He also was breathing in the direction of the princess's apartment his prayers and the wild visions of his love. Raoul could not resist smiling, as thinking of Madame, he said to himself, "Hers is, indeed, a heart well besieged," and then added, compassionately, as he thought of Monsieur, "and he is a husband well threatened too. It is a good thing for him that he is a prince of such high rank, that he has an army to safeguard for him that which is his own." Bragelonne watched for some time the conduct of the two lovers, listened to the loud and uncivil slumbers of Manicamp, who snored as imperiously as though he was wearing his blue and gold instead of his violet suit. Then he turned towards the night breeze which brought towards him. He seemed to think the distant song of the nightingale, and, after having laid in a due provision of melancholy, another nocturnal melody, he retired to rest thinking, with regard to his own love affair, that perhaps four or even a larger number of eyes, quite as ardent as those of De Guiche and Buckingham, were coveting his own idol in the shadow at Blois. "And Mademoiselle de Montalais is by no means a very conscientious garrison," said he to himself, sighing aloud. Chapter 87. From Havre to Paris. The next day the fêtes took place, accompanied by all the pomp and animation that the resources of the town and the cheerful disposition of men's minds could supply. During the last few hours spent in Havre, every preparation for the departure had been made. After Madame had taken leave of the English fleet, and, once again, had saluted the country in saluting its flags, She entered her carriage, surrounded by a brilliant escort. De Guiche had hoped that the Duke of Buckingham would accompany the Admiral to England, but Buckingham succeeded in demonstrating to the Queen that there would be great impropriety in allowing Madame to proceed to Paris almost unprotected. As soon as it had been settled that Buckingham was to accompany Madame, the young Duke selected a corps of gentlemen and officers to form part of his own suite, so that it was almost an army that now set out towards Paris, scattering gold, and exciting the liveliest demonstrations as they passed through the different towns and villages on the route. The weather was very fine. France is a beautiful country, especially along the route by which the procession passed. Spring cast its flowers and its perfumed foliage on their path. Normandy, with its vast variety of vegetation, its blue skies and silver rivers, displayed itself in all the loveliness of a paradise to the new sister of the king. Fetes and brilliant displays received them everywhere along the line of march. De Guiche and Buckingham forgot everything. De Guiche in his anxiety to prevent any fresh attempts on the part of the Duke, and Buckingham in his desire to awaken in the heart of the princess a softer remembrance of the country to which the recollection of many happy days belonged. But, alas, the poor Duke could perceive that the image of that country so cherished by himself became, from day to day, more and more effaced in Madame's mind, in exact proportion as her affection for France became more deeply engraved on her heart. In fact, it was not difficult to perceive that his most devoted attention awakened no acknowledgment, and that the grace with which he rode one of his most fiery horses was thrown away, for it was only casually and by the merest accident that the princess's eyes were turned towards him. In vain did he try, in order to fix upon himself one of those looks, which were thrown carelessly around, or bestowed elsewhere, to produce in the animal he rode its greatest display of strength, speed, temper, and address. In vain did he, by exciting his horse almost to madness, spur him, at the risk of dashing himself in pieces against the trees, or rolling in the ditches, over the gates and barriers which they passed, or down the steep declivities of the hills. Madame, whose attention had been aroused by the noise, turned her head for a moment to observe the cause of it, and then, slightly smiling, again entered into conversation with her faithful guardians, Raoul and de Guiche, who were quietly riding at her carriage doors. Buckingham felt himself a prey to all the tortures of jealousy. An unknown, unheard of anguish glided through his veins and laid siege to his heart. And then, as if to show that he knew the folly of his conduct and that he wished to correct, by the humblest submission, his flights of absurdity, he mastered his horse and compelled him, reeking with sweat and flecked with foam, to champ his bit close beside the carriage, amidst a crowd of courtiers. Occasionally he obtained a word from Madame as a recompense, and yet her speech seemed almost a reproach. "That is well, my lord," she said, "now you are reasonable." Or from Raoul, "Your grace is killing your horse." Buckingham listened patiently to Raoul's remarks, for he instinctively felt, without having had any proof that such was the case, that Raoul checked the display of de Guiche's feelings, and that, had it not been for Raoul, some mad act or proceeding, either the Count or Buckingham himself, would have brought about an open rupture, or a disturbance, perhaps even exile itself. From the moment of their excited conversation, the two young men had held in front of the tents at Havre. When Raoul made the Duke perceive the impropriety of his conduct, Buckingham felt himself attracted towards Raoul almost in spite of himself. Instead, however, of treating the subject with the same reserve which Raoul practiced, instead of regarding with that respect, which was their due, the obligations and duties of society, De Wardes resolutely attacked in the Count the ever-sounding chord of juvenile audacity and pride. It happened one evening, during a halt at Nantes, that while de Guiche and De Wardes were leaning against a barrier, engaged in conversation, Buckingham and Raoul were also talking together as they walked up and down. Manicamp was engaged in devoted attendance on the princess, who already treated him without reserve, on account of his versatile fancy, his frank courtesy of manner, and conciliatory disposition. "Confess," said De Wardes, "that you are really ill and that your pedagogue of a friend has not succeeded in curing you." "I do not understand you," said the Count, "and yet it is easy enough. You are dying of love." "You are mad, De Wardes." "Madness it would be, I admit, if Madame were really indifferent to your martyrdom, but she takes so much notice of it, observes it to such an extent that she compromises herself, and I tremble lest, on our arrival at Paris, M. de Bragelonne may not denounce both of you. For shame, De Wardes, again attacking de Bragelonne. Come, come, a truce to child's play, replied the Count's evil genius, in an undertone. You know as well as I do what I mean. Besides, you must have observed how the princess's glance softens as she looks at you. You can tell, by the very inflection of her voice, what pleasure she takes in listening to you, and can feel how thoroughly she appreciates the verses you recite to her. You cannot deny, too, that every morning she tells you how indifferently she slept the previous night. True, De Wardes, quite true, but what good is there in your telling me all that? Is it not important to know the exact position of affairs? No, not when I am a witness of things that are enough to drive one mad. Stay, said De Wardes. Look, she calls you. Do you understand? Profit by the occasion, while your pedagogue is absent. De Guiche could not resist. An invincible attraction drew him towards the princess. De Wardes smiled as he saw him withdraw. You are mistaken, monsieur, said Raoul, suddenly stepping across the barrier against which the previous moment the two friends had been leaning. The pedagogue is here, and has overheard you. De Wardes, at the sound of Raoul's voice, which he recognized without having occasion to look at him, half drew his sword. Put up your sword, said Raoul. You know perfectly well that, until our journey is at an end, every demonstration of that nature is useless. Why do you distill into the heart of the man you term your friend all the bitterness that infects your own? As regards myself, you wish to arouse a feeling of deep dislike against a man of honor, my father's friend and my own. And as for the Count, you wish him to love one who is destined for your master. Really, monsieur, I should regard you as a coward and a traitor too, if I did not, with greater justice, regard you as a madman. You lie, monsieur, said Raoul coolly. You give me the lie, monsieur, exclaimed De Wardes. Why not, if what you assert is untrue? You give me the lie and will not draw your sword. I have resolved, monsieur, not to kill you until madame shall have been delivered safely into her husband's hands. Kill me? Believe me, monsieur, your schoolmaster's rod does not kill so easily. No, replied Raoul sternly, but M. d'Artagnan's sword kills, and not only do I possess his sword, but he has himself taught me how to use it, and with that sword, when a befitting time arrives, I will avenge his name, a name you have dishonoured. Take care, monsieur, exclaimed De Wardes. If you do not immediately give me satisfaction, I will avail myself of every means to revenge myself. Indeed, monsieur, said Buckingham, suddenly, appearing upon the scene of action, that is a threat which savours of assassination, and therefore ill becomes a gentleman. What did you say, my lord? Said De Wardes, turning round towards him. I said, monsieur, that the words you spoken are displeasing to my English ears. Very well, monsieur, if what you say is true, exclaimed De Wardes, thoroughly incensed, I at least find in you one who will not escape me. Understand my words as you like. I take them in the manner they cannot but be understood, replied Buckingham, with that haughty tone which characterized him, and which, even in ordinary conversation, gave a tone of defiance to everything he said. M. de Bragelonne is my friend. You insult M. de Bragelonne, and you shall give me satisfaction for that insult. De Wardes cast a look upon de Bragelonne, who, faithful to the character he had assumed, remained calm and unmoved, even after the Duke's defiance. It would seem that I did not insult M. de Bragelonne, since M. de Bragelonne, who carries a sword by his side, does not consider himself insulted. At all events, you insult someone. Yes, I insulted M. d'Artagnan, resumed De Wardes, who had observed that this was the only means of stinging Raoul, so as to awaken his anger. That then, said Buckingham, is another matter. Precisely so, said De Wardes. It is the province of M. d'Artagnan's friends to defend him. I am entirely of your opinion, replied the Duke, who had regained all his indifference of manner. If M. de Bragelonne were offended, I could not reasonably be expected to espouse his quarrel, since he is himself here. But when you say that it is a quarrel of M. d'Artagnan, you will of course leave me to deal with the matter, said De Wardes. Nay, on the contrary, for I draw my sword, said Buckingham, unsheathing it as he spoke. For if M. d'Artagnan injured your father, he rendered, or at least did all that he could render, a great service to mine. De Wardes was thunderstruck. M. d'Artagnan, continued Buckingham, is the bravest gentleman I know. I shall be delighted, as I owe him many personal obligations, to settle them with you by crossing my sword with yours. At the same moment Buckingham drew his sword gracefully from its scabbard, saluted Raoul, and put himself on guard. De Wardes advanced a step to meet him. Stay, gentlemen, said Raoul, advancing towards them, and placing his own drawn sword between the combatants. The affair is hardly worth the trouble of blood being shed almost in the presence of the princess. M. de Wardes speaks ill of M. d'Artagnan, with whom he is not even acquainted. What, monsieur, said De Wardes, setting his teeth hard together, and resting the point of his sword on the toe of his boot, do you assert that I do not know M. d'Artagnan? Certainly not. You do not know him, replied Raoul coldly, and you are even not aware where he is to be found. Not know where he is. Such must be the case, since you fix your quarrel with him upon strangers, instead of seeking M. d'Artagnan where he is to be found. De Wardes turned pale. Well, monsieur, continued Raoul, I will tell you where M. d'Artagnan is. He is now in Paris. When on duty, he is to be met with at the Louvre. When not on duty, in the Rue des Lombards. M. d'Artagnan can be easily discovered at either of those two places. Having, therefore, as you assert, so many causes of complaint against him, show your courage in seeking him out, and afford him an opportunity of giving you that satisfaction you seem to ask of every one but of himself. De Wardes passed his hand across his forehead, which was covered with perspiration. For shame, M. de Wardes. So quarrelsome a disposition is hardly becoming after the publication of the edicts against duels. Pray think of that. The king will be incensed at our disobedience, particularly at such a time, and his majesty will be in the right. Excuses, murmured De Wardes, mere pretexts. Really, M. de Wardes, resumed Raoul, such remarks are the idlest bluster. You know very well that the Duke of Buckingham is a man of undoubted courage, who has already fought 10 duels, and will probably fight 11. His name alone is significant enough. As far as I'm concerned, you are well aware that I can fight also. I fought at Sens, at Blenheim, at the dunes in front of the artillery, 100 paces in front of the line, while you, I say this parenthetically, were 100 paces behind it. True it is that on that occasion there was far too great a concourse of persons present for your courage to be observed, and on that account, perhaps, you did not reveal it. While here, it would be a display, and would excite remark. You wish that others should talk about you, in what manner you do not care. Do not depend upon me, M. de Wardes, to assist you in your designs, for I shall certainly not afford you that pleasure. Sensibly observed, said Buckingham, putting up his sword, and I ask your forgiveness, M. de Bragelonne, for having allowed myself to yield to a first impulse. De Wardes, however, on the contrary, perfectly furious, bounded forward and raised his sword threateningly against Raoul, who had scarcely time to put himself in a posture of defense. Take care, monsieur, said Bragelonne, tranquilly, or you will put out one of my eyes. You will not fight, then, said De Wardes. Not at this moment, but this I promise to do. Immediately on our arrival at Paris, I will conduct you to M. d'Artagnan, to whom you shall detail all the causes of complaint you have against him. M. d'Artagnan will solicit the king's permission to measure swords with you. The king will yield his consent, and when you shall receive the sword thrust in due course, you will consider, in a calmer frame of mind, the precepts of the gospel, which enjoin forgetfulness of injuries. Ah! Exclaimed De Wardes, furious at this imperturbable coolness. One can clearly see you are half a bastard, M. de Bragelonne. Raoul became as pale as death. His eyes flashed lightning, causing the wards involuntarily to fall back. Buckingham, also, who had perceived their expression, threw himself between the two adversaries, whom he had expected to see precipitate themselves on each other. De Wardes had reserved this injury for the last. He clasped his sword firmly in his hand and awaited the encounter. "You are right, monsieur," said Raoul, mastering his emotion. "I am only acquainted with my father's name, but I know too well that the Comte de la Fere is too upright and honorable a man to allow me to fear for a single moment that there is, as you insinuate, any stain upon my birth. My ignorance, therefore, of my mother's name is a misfortune for me and not a reproach. You are deficient in loyalty of conduct. You are wanting in courtesy, in reproaching me with misfortune. It matters little, however. The insult has been given, and I consider myself insulted accordingly. It is quite understood, then, that after you shall have received satisfaction from M. d'Artagnan, you will settle your quarrel with me." "I admire your prudence, monsieur," replied De Wardes with a bitter smile. "A little while ago you promised me a sword thrust from M. d'Artagnan, and now, after I shall have received his, you offer me one from yourself." "Do not disturb yourself," replied Raoul, with concentrated anger. "In all affairs of that nature, and d'Artagnan is exceedingly skillful, and I will beg him as a favor to treat you as he did your father. In other words, to spare your life at least, so as to leave me the pleasure, after your recovery, of killing you outright, for you have the heart of a viper, M. de Wardes, and in very truth, too many precautions cannot be taken against you." "I shall take my precautions against you," said De Wardes. "Be assured of it." "Allow me, monsieur," said Buckingham, "to translate your remark by a piece of advice I am about to give M. de Bragelonne. M. de Bragelonne, wear a cuirass." De Wardes clenched his hands. "Ow!" said he. "You two gentlemen intend to wait until you have taken that precaution before you measure your swords against mine." "Very well, monsieur," said Raoul. "Since you positively will have it so, let us settle the affair now." And drawing his sword, he advanced towards De Wardes. "What are you going to do?" said Buckingham. "Be easy," said Raoul. "It will not be very long." Then as De Wardes stood disarmed and astounded at his defeat, Raoul sheathed his sword, seized him by the collar and the waistband, and hurled his adversary to the other end of the barrier, trembling and mad with rage. "We shall meet again," murmured De Wardes, rising from the ground and picking up his sword. "I have done nothing for the last hour," said Raoul, "but say the same thing." Then, turning towards the Duke, he said, "I entreat you to be silent about this affair. I am ashamed to have gone so far, but my anger carried me away, and I ask your forgiveness for it. Forget it, too." "Dear Viscount," said the Duke, pressing within his own the vigorous and valiant hand of his companion, "allow me, on the contrary, to remember it and to look after your safety. That man is dangerous. He will kill you." "My father," replied Raoul, "lived for 20 years under the menace of a much more formidable enemy, and he still lives." "Your father had good friends, Viscount." "Yes," sighed Raoul, "such friends indeed that none are now left like them." "Do not say that, I beg, at the very moment I offer you my friendship." And Buckingham opened his arms to embrace Raoul, who delightedly received the proffered alliance. "In my family," added Buckingham, "you are aware, M. de Bragelonne, we die to save our friends." "I know it well, Duke," replied Raoul. Chapter 88. An account of what the Chevalier de Lorraine thought of Madame. Nothing further interrupted the journey. Under a pretext that was little remarked, M. de Wardes went forward in advance of the others. He took Manicamp with him, for his equable and dreamy disposition acted as a counterpoise to his own. It is a subject of remark that quarrelsome and restless characters invariably seek the companionship of gentle, timorous dispositions, as if the former sought, in the contrast, a repose for their own ill humor, and the latter protection for their weakness. Buckingham and Bragelonne, admitting De Guiche into their friendship, in concert with him, sang the praises of the princess during the whole of the journey. Bragelonne had, however, insisted that their three voices should be in concert, instead of singing in solo parts, as de Guiche and his rival seemed to have acquired a dangerous habit of investigation. This style of harmony pleased the Queen Mother exceedingly, but it was not perhaps so agreeable to the young princess, who was an incarnation of coquetry, and who, without any fear as far as her own voice was concerned, sought opportunities of so perilously distinguishing herself. She possessed one of those fearless and incautious dispositions that find gratification in an excessive sensitiveness of feeling, and for whom, also, danger has a certain fascination. And so her glances, her smiles, her toilette, an inexhaustible army of weapons of offense, was showered on the three young men with overwhelming force, and, from her well-stored arsenal issued glances, kindly recognitions, and 1,000 other little charming attentions which were intended to strike at long range the gentlemen who formed the escort, the townspeople, the officers of the different cities you passed through, pages, populace, and servants. It was wholesale slaughter, a general devastation. By the time Madame arrived at Paris, she had reduced to slavery about 100,000 lovers, and brought in a train to Paris half a dozen men who were almost mad about her, and two who were, indeed, literally out of their minds. Raoul was the only person who divined the power of this woman's attraction, and as his heart was already engaged, he arrived in the capital full of indifference and distrust. Occasionally during the journey he conversed with the Queen of England respecting the power of fascination which Madame possessed, and the mother, whom so many misfortunes and deceptions had taught experience, replied, Henrietta was sure to be illustrious in one way or another, whether born in a palace or born in obscurity, for she is a woman of great imagination, capricious and self-willed. De Wardes and Manicamp, in their self-assumed character of courtiers, had announced the princess's arrival. The procession was met at Nanterre by a brilliant escort of cavaliers and carriages. It was Monsieur himself, followed by the Chevalier de Lorraine and by his favorites, the latter being themselves followed by a portion of the king's military household, who had arrived to meet his affianced bride. At Saint-Germain, the princess and her mother had changed their heavy traveling carriage, somewhat impaired by the journey, for a light, richly decorated chariot drawn by 6 horses with white and gold harness. Seated in this open carriage, as though upon a throne, and beneath a parasol of embroidered silk, fringed with feathers, sat the young and lovely princess, on whose beaming face were reflected the softened rose tints which suited her delicate skin to perfection. Monsieur, on reaching the carriage, was struck by her beauty. He showed his admiration in so mock a manner that the Chevalier de Lorraine shrugged his shoulders as he listened to his compliments, while Buckingham and de Guiche were almost heartbroken. After the usual courtesies had been rendered, and the ceremony completed, the procession slowly resumed the road to Paris. The presentations had been carelessly made, and Buckingham, with the rest of the English gentlemen, had been introduced to Monsieur, from whom they had received but very indifferent attention. But, during their progress, as he observed that the Duke devoted himself with his accustomed earnestness to the carriage door, he asked the Chevalier de Lorraine, his inseparable companion, "Who is that cavalier?" "He was presented to your Highness a short while ago. It is the handsome Duke of Buckingham." "Ah, yes, I remember." "Madame's knight," added the favorite, with an inflection of the voice which envious minds can alone give to the simplest phrases. "What do you say?" replied the prince. "I said Madame's knight." "Has she a recognized knight, then?" "One would think you can judge of that for yourself. Look only how they are laughing and flirting. All 3 of them." "What do you mean by all 3? Do you not see that de Guiche is one of the party?" "Yes, I see. But what does that prove?" "That Madame has 2 admirers instead of 1. Thou poison the simplest thing." "I poison nothing." "Ah, your Royal Highness's mind is perverted. The honors of the Kingdom of France are being paid to your wife, and you are not satisfied." The Duke of Orleans dreaded the satirical humor of the Chevalier de Lorraine whenever it reached a certain degree of bitterness, and he changed the conversation abruptly. "The princess is pretty," said he, very negligently, as if he were speaking of a stranger. "Yes," replied the Chevalier in the same tone. "You say yes, like a... No, she has very beautiful black eyes." "Yes, but small." "That is so, but they are brilliant. She is tall and of a good figure." I fancy she stoops a little, my lord. I do not deny it. She has a noble appearance. Yes, but her face is thin. I thought her teeth beautiful. They can easily be seen, for her mouth is large enough. Decidedly, I was wrong, my lord. You are certainly handsomer than your wife. But do you think me as handsome as Buckingham? Certainly, and he thinks so, too. For look, my lord, he is redoubling his attentions to Madame to prevent you effacing the impression he has made. Monsieur made a movement of impatience, but as he noticed a smile of triumph pass across the Chevalier's lips, he drew up his horse to a foot-pace. Why, said he, should I occupy myself any longer about my cousin? Do I not already know her? Were we not brought up together? Did I not see her at the Louvre when she was quite a child? A great change has taken place in her since then, Prince. At the period you allude to, she was somewhat less brilliant, and scarcely so proud, either. One evening, particularly, you may remember, my lord, the king refused to dance with her because he thought her plain and badly dressed. These words made the Duke of Orleans frown. It was by no means flattering for him to marry a princess of whom, when young, the king had not thought much. He would probably have retorted, but at this moment de Guiche quitted the carriage to join the prince. He had remarked the prince and the chevalier together, and full of anxious attention, he seemed to try and guess the nature of the remarks which they had just exchanged. The chevalier, whether he had some treacherous object in view, or from imprudence, did not take the trouble to dissimulate. Count, he said, you're a man of excellent taste. Thank you for the compliment, replied de Guiche. But why do you say that? Well, I appeal to His Highness. No doubt of it, said Monsieur, and Guiche knows perfectly well that I regard him as a most finished cavalier. Well, since that is decided, I resume, you have been in the princess's society, Count, for the last 8 days, have you not? Yes, replied de Guiche, coloring in spite of himself. Well, then, tell us frankly, what do you think of her personal appearance? Of her personal appearance, returned de Guiche, stupefied. Yes, of her appearance, of her mind, of herself, in fact. Astounded by this question, de Guiche hesitated answering. Come, de Guiche, resumed the chevalier, laughingly. Tell us your opinion frankly. The prince commands it. Yes, said the prince. Be frank. De Guiche stammered out a few unintelligible words. I am perfectly well aware, returned Monsieur, that the subject is a delicate one, but you know you can tell me everything. What do you think of her? In order to avoid betraying his real thoughts, de Guiche had recourse to the only defense which a man taken by surprise really has, and accordingly told an untruth. I do not find Madame, he said, either good or bad-looking, yet rather good than bad-looking. What? Count, exclaimed the chevalier, you went into such ecstasies and uttered so many exclamations at the sight of a portrait. De Guiche colored violently. Very fortunately his horse, which was slightly restive, enabled him by a sudden plunge to conceal his agitation. What portrait? He murmured, joining them again. The chevalier had not taken his eyes off him. Yes, the portrait. Was not the miniature good likeness? I do not remember. I had forgotten the portrait. It quite escaped my recollection. And yet it made a very marked impression upon you, said the chevalier. That is not unlikely. Is she witty, at all events? Inquired the duke. I believe so, my lord. Is M. de Buckingham witty, too? Said the chevalier. I do not know. My own opinion is that he must be, replied the chevalier, for he makes Madame laugh, and she seems to take no little pleasure in his society, which never happens to a clever woman when in the company of a simpleton. Of course, then, he must be clever, said de Guiche, simply. At this moment Raoul opportunely arrived. Seeing how de Guiche was pressed by his dangerous questioner, to whom he addressed a remark, and in that way changed the conversation. The intrigue was brilliant and joyous. The king, in honor of his brother, had directed that the festivities should be on a scale of the greatest possible magnificence. Madame and her mother alighted at the Louvre, where, during their exile, they had so gloomily submitted to obscurity, misery, and privations of every description. That palace, which had been so inhospitable a residence for the unhappy daughter of Henry IV, the naked walls, the uneven floorings, the ceilings matted with cobwebs, the vast dilapidated chimney places, the cold hearths on which the charity extended to them by Parliament hardly permitted a fire to glow, was completely altered in appearance. The richest hangings and the thickest carpets, glistening flagstones and pictures, with their richly gilded frames. In every direction could be seen candelabra, mirrors, and furniture and fittings of the most sumptuous character. In every direction, also, were guards of the proudest military bearing, with floating plumes, crowds of attendants and courtiers in the antechambers and upon the staircases. In the courtyards, where the grass had formerly been allowed to luxuriate, as if the ungrateful Mazarin had thought it a good idea to let the Parisians perceive that solitude and disorder were, with misery and despair, the fit accompaniments of fallen monarchy. The immense courtyards, formerly silent and desolate, were now thronged with courtiers whose horses were pacing and prancing to and fro. The carriages were filled with young and beautiful women, who awaited the opportunity of saluting, as she passed, the daughter of that daughter of France who, during her widowhood and exile, had sometimes gone without wood for her fire and bread for her table, whom the meanest attendants at the chateau had treated with indifference and contempt. And so, Madame Henrietta once more returned to the Louvre, with her heart more swollen with bitter recollections than her daughter's, whose disposition was fickle and forgetful, with triumph and delight. She knew but too well this brilliant reception was paid to the happy mother of a king restored to his throne, a throne second to none in Europe, while the worse and indifferent reception she had before met with was paid to her, the daughter of Henry IV, as a punishment for having been unfortunate. After the princesses had been installed in their apartments and had rested, the gentlemen who had formed their escort, having, in like manner, recovered from their fatigue, they resumed their accustomed habits and occupations. Raoul began by setting off to see his father, who had left for Blois. He then tried to see M. d'Artagnan, who, however, being engaged in the organization of a military household for the king, could not be found anywhere. Bragelonne next sought out de Guiche, but the count was occupied in a long conference with his tailors and with Manicamp, which consumed his whole time. With the Duke of Buckingham he fared still worse, for the Duke was purchasing horses after horses, diamonds upon diamonds. He monopolized every embroiderer, jeweler, and tailor that Paris could boast of. Between de Guiche and himself a vigorous contest ensued, invariably a courteous one, in which, in order to ensure success, the Duke was ready to spend 1,000,000, while the Maréchal de Grandmont had only allowed his son 60,000 francs. So Buckingham laughed and spent his money. Guiche groaned in despair, and would have shown it more violently, had it not been for the advice de Bragelonne gave him. "1,000,000, repeated de Guiche daily. I must submit. Why will not the Maréchal advance me a portion of my patrimony?" "Because you would throw it away," said Raoul. "What can that matter to him? If I am to die of it, I shall die of it, and then I shall need nothing further." "But what need is there to die?" said Raoul. "I do not wish to be conquered in elegance by an Englishman." "My dear Count," said Manicamp, "elegance is not a costly commodity. It is only a very difficult accomplishment." "Yes, but difficult things cost a good deal of money, and I have only got 60,000 francs. "A very embarrassing state of things, truly," said de Wardes. "Even if you spend as much as Buckingham, there is only 940,000 francs difference. Where am I to find them?" "Get into debt." "I am in debt already." "A greater reason for getting further." Advice like this resulted in de Guiche becoming excited to such an extent that he committed extravagances where Buckingham only incurred expenses. The rumor of this extravagant profuseness delighted the hearts of all the shopkeepers in Paris. From a hotel of the Duke of Buckingham to that of the Comte de Grandmont, nothing but miracles was attempted. While all this was going on, Madame was resting herself, and Bragelonne was engaged in writing to Mademoiselle de la Valliere. He had already dispatched 4 letters, and not an answer to any one of them had been received, when, On the very morning fixed for the marriage ceremony, which was to take place in the chapel at the Palais Royal, Raoul, who was dressing, heard his valet announce M. de Malicorne. "What can this Malicorne want with me?" thought Raoul, and then said to his valet, "Let him wait." "It is a gentleman from Blois," said the valet. "Admit him at once," said Raoul eagerly. Malicorne entered as brilliant as a star, and wearing a superb sword at his side. After having saluted Raoul most gracefully, he said, "M. de Bragelonne, I am the bearer of 1,000 compliments from a lady to you." Raoul colored. "From a lady," said he, "from a lady of Blois." "Yes, monsieur, from Mademoiselle de Montalais." "Thank you, monsieur, I recollect you now," said Raoul. "And what does Mademoiselle de Montalais require of me?" Malicorne drew 4 letters from his pocket, which he offered to Raoul. "My own letters. Is it possible?" he said, turning pale. "My letters, and the seals unbroken." "Monsieur, your letters did not find at Blois the person to whom they were addressed, and so they are now returned to you." "Mademoiselle de la Valliere has left Blois, then?" exclaimed Raoul. "8 days ago." "Where is she, then?" "In Paris." "How was it known that these letters were from me?" "Mademoiselle de Montalais recognized your handwriting and your seal," said Malicorne. Raoul colored and smiled. "Mademoiselle de Montalais is exceedingly amiable," he said. "She is always kind and charming." "Always, monsieur." "Surely she could give me some precise information about Mademoiselle de la Valliere. I never could find her in this immense city." Malicorne drew another packet from his pocket. "You may possibly find in this letter what you are anxious to learn." Raoul hurriedly broke the seal. The writing was that of Mademoiselle Or, and enclosed with these words, "Paris, Palais Royal, the day of the nuptial blessing." "What does this mean?" inquired Raoul of Malicorne. "You probably know." "I do, monsieur." "For pity's sake, tell me, then." "Impossible, monsieur." "Why so?" "Because Mademoiselle has forbidden me to do so." Raoul looked at his strange visitor and remained silent. "At least, tell me whether it is fortunate or unfortunate." "That you will see." "You are very severe in your reservations." "Will you grant me a favor, monsieur?" said Malicorne. "In exchange for that you refuse me?" "Precisely." "What is it?" "I have the greatest desire to see the ceremony, and I have no ticket to admit me, in spite of all the steps I have taken to secure one. Could you get me admitted?" "Certainly." "Do me this kindness, then, I entreat." "Most willingly, monsieur. Come with me." "I am exceedingly indebted to you, monsieur," said Malicorne. "I thought you were a friend of M. de Manicamp." "I am, monsieur. But this morning I was with him as he was dressing, and I let a bottle of blacking fall over his new dress, and he flew at me sword in hand, so that I was obliged to make my escape. That is the reason I could not ask him for a ticket. He wanted to kill me." "I can well believe it," laughed Raoul. "I know Manicamp is capable of killing a man who has been unfortunate enough to commit the crime you have to reproach yourself with, but I will repair the mischief as far as you are concerned. I will but fasten my cloak, and shall then be ready to serve you, not only as a guide, but as your introducer, too." Chapter 89. A surprise from Madame de Montalais. Madame's marriage was celebrated in the chapel of the Palais Royal, in the presence of a crowd of courtiers, who had been most scrupulously selected. However, notwithstanding the marked favor which an invitation indicated, Raoul, faithful to his promise to Malicorne, who was so anxious to witness the ceremony, obtained admission for him. After he had fulfilled his engagement, Raoul approached de Guiche, who, as if in contrast with his magnificent costume, exhibited a countenance so utterly dejected that the Duke of Buckingham was the only one present who could contend with him as far as pallor and discomfiture were concerned. "Take care, Count," said Raoul, approaching his friend and preparing to support him at the moment the Archbishop blessed the married couple. In fact, the Prince of Condé was attentively scrutinizing these 2 images of desolation, standing like caryatides on either side of the nave of the church. The Count, after that, kept a more careful watch over himself. At the termination of the ceremony, the king and queen passed onward towards a grand reception room, where Madame and a suite were to be presented to them. It was remarked that the king, who had seemed more than surprised at his sister-in-law's appearance, was most flattering in his compliments to her. Again, it was remarked that the Queen Mother, fixing a long and thoughtful gaze upon Buckingham, leaned towards Madame de Motteville as though to ask her, "Do you not see how much he resembles his father?" And finally it was remarked that Monsieur watched everybody and seemed quite discontented. After the reception of the princess and ambassadors, Monsieur solicited the king's permission to present to him as well as to Madame the persons belonging to their new household. "Are you aware, Vicomte," inquired the Prince de Condé of Raoul, "whether the household has been selected by a person of taste, and whether there are any faces worth looking at?" "I have not the slightest idea, Monseigneur," replied Raoul. "You affect ignorance, surely." "In what way, Monseigneur?" "You are a friend of de Guiche, who is one of the friends of the prince." "That may be so, Monseigneur, but the matter having no interest whatever for me, I never questioned de Guiche on the subject, and de Guiche on his part, never having been questioned, did not communicate any particulars to me. But Manicamp! It is true I saw Manicamp at Havre, and during the journey here, but I was no more inquisitive with him than I had been towards de Guiche. Besides, is it likely that Manicamp should know anything of such matters? For he is a person of only secondary importance." "My dear Vicomte, do you not know better than that?" said the prince. "Why, it is these persons of secondary importance who, on such occasions, have all the influence, and the truth is that nearly everything is being done through Manicamp's presentations to de Guiche, and through de Guiche to Monsieur." "I assure you, Monseigneur, I was ignorant of that," said Raoul, "and what your highness does me the honor to impart is perfectly new to me." "I will most readily believe you, although it seems incredible. Besides, we shall not have long to wait. See, the flying squadron is advancing, as good Queen Catherine used to say. Ah, what pretty faces." A bevy of young girls at this moment entered the salon, conducted by Madame de Nivelles, and to Manicamp's credit be it said, if indeed he had taken that part in their selection which the Prince de Condé assigned him, it was a display calculated to dazzle those who, like the prince, could appreciate every character and style of beauty. A young, fair-complexioned girl, from 20 to 21 years of age, and whose large blue eyes flashed as she opened them, in the most dazzling manner, walked at the head of the band and was the first presented. "Mademoiselle de Tonnay-Charente," said Madame de Nivelles and Monsieur, who, as he saluted his wife, repeated Mademoiselle de Tonnay-Charente. Ah, said the Prince de Condé to Raoul. "She is presentable enough." "Yes," said Raoul, "but has she not a somewhat haughty style?" "Bah! We know these airs very well, Vicomte. 3 months hence she will be tame enough. But look, there, indeed, is a pretty face." "Yes," said Raoul, "and one I am acquainted with." "Mademoiselle de Montalais," said Madame de Nivelles. The name and Christian name were carefully repeated by Monsieur. "Great heavens!" exclaimed Raoul, fixing his bewildered gaze upon the entrance doorway. "What's the matter?" inquired the prince. "Was it Mademoiselle de Montalais who made you utter such a great heavens?" "No, Monseigneur, no," replied Raoul, pale and trembling. "Well, then, if it be not Mademoiselle de Montalais, it is that pretty blonde who follows her. What beautiful eyes! She is rather thin, but has fascinations without number." "Mademoiselle de la Baume le Blanc de la Valliere," said Madame de Nivelles, and, as this name resounded through his whole being, a cloud seemed to rise from his breast to his eyes, so that he neither saw nor heard anything more. And the prince, finding him nothing more than a mere echo which remained silent under his railleries, moved forward to inspect somewhat closer the beautiful girls whom his first glance had already particularized. "Louise here. Louise, a maid of honor to Madame," murmured Raoul, and his eyes, which did not suffice to satisfy his reason, wandered from Louise to Montalais. The latter had already emancipated herself from her assumed timidity, which she only needed for the presentation and for her reverences. Mademoiselle de Montalais, from the corner of the room to which he had retired, was looking with no slight confidence at the different persons present, and, having discovered Raoul, she amused herself with the profound astonishment which her own and her friend's presence there caused the unhappy lover. Her waggish and malicious look, which Raoul tried to avoid meeting, and which yet he sought inquiringly from time to time, placed him on the rack. As for Louise, whether from natural timidity or some other reason for which Raoul could not account, she kept her eyes constantly cast down, intimidated, dazzled, and with impeded respiration. She withdrew herself as much as possible aside, unaffected even by the nudges Montalais gave her with her elbow. The whole scene was a perfect enigma for Raoul, the key to which he would have given anything to obtain. But no one was there who could assist him, not even Malicorne, who, a little uneasy at finding himself in the presence of so many persons of good birth, and not a little discouraged by Montalais's bantering glances, had described a circle, and by degrees succeeded in getting a few paces from the prince, behind the group of maids of honor, and nearly within reach of Mademoiselle's voice, she being the planet around which he, as her attendant satellite, seemed constrained to gravitate. As he recovered his self-possession, Raoul fancied he recognized voices on his right hand that were familiar to him, and he perceived de Wardes, de Guiche, and the Chevalier de Lorraine conversing together. It is true they were talking in tones so low that the sound of their word could hardly be heard in the vast apartment. To speak in that manner from any particular place without bending down, or turning round, or looking at the person with whom one may be engaged in conversation, is a talent that cannot be immediately acquired by newcomers. Long study is needed for such conversations, which, without a look, gesture, or movement of the head, seem like the conversation of a group of statues. In fact, in the king's and queen's grand assemblies, while their majesties were speaking, and while every one present seemed to be listening in the midst of the most profound silence, some of these noiseless conversations took place, in which adulation was not the prevailing feature. But Raoul was one among others exceedingly clever in this art, so much a matter of etiquette, that from the movement of the lips he was often able to guess the sense of the words. "Who is that Montalais?" inquired de Wardes, "and that La Valliere? What country town have we had sent here?" "Montalais," said the Chevalier. "Oh, I know her. She is a good sort of a girl, whom we shall find amusing enough. La Valliere is a charming girl, slightly lame." "Ah, bow," said de Wardes. "Do not be absurd, de Wardes. There are some very characteristic and ingenious Latin axioms about lame ladies." "Gentlemen, gentlemen," said de Guiche, looking at Raoul with uneasiness, "be a little careful, I entreat you." But the uneasiness of the count, in appearance at least, was not needed. Raoul had preserved the firmest and most indifferent countenance, although he had not lost a word that passed. He seemed to keep an account of the insolence and license of the two speakers in order to settle matters with them at the earliest opportunity. De Wardes seemed to guess what was passing in his mind, and continued, "Who are these young ladies' lovers?" "Montalais's lover," said the Chevalier. "Yes, Montalais first. You, I, or de Guiche, whoever likes, in fact. And the other, Mademoiselle de la Valliere." "Yes." "Take care, gentlemen," exclaimed de Guiche, anxious to put a stop to de Wardes' reply. "Take care. Madame is listening to us." Raoul thrust his hand up to the wrist into his justaux's copes in great agitation. But the very malignity which he saw was excited against these poor girls made him take a serious resolution. "Poor Louise," he thought, "has come here only with an honorable object in view and under honorable protection, and I must learn what that object is which he has in view, and who it is that protects her." And following Malicorne's maneuver, he made his way toward the group of the maids of honor. The presentations were soon over. The king, who had done nothing but look at and admire Madame, shortly afterwards left the reception-room, accompanied by the two queens. The Chevalier de Lorraine resumed his place beside Monsieur, and, as he accompanied him, insinuated a few drops of the venom he had collected during the last hour, while looking at some of the faces in the court, and suspecting that some of their hearts might be happy. A few of the persons present followed the king as he quitted the apartment, but such of the courtiers as assumed an independence of character and professed a gallantry of disposition began to approach the ladies of the court. The prince paid his compliments to Mademoiselle de Tonnay-Charente. Buckingham devoted himself to Madame Chellet and Mademoiselle de Lafayette, whom Madame already distinguished by her notice, and whom she held in high regard. As for the Comte de Guiche, who had abandoned Monsieur as soon as he could approach Madame alone, he conversed, with great animation, with Madame de Valentinois, and with Mademoiselle de Crequy and de Chatillon. Amid these very political and amorous interests, Malicorne was anxious to gain Montalais's attention, but the latter preferred talking with Raoul, even if it were only to amuse herself with his innumerable questions and his astonishment. Raoul had gone direct to Mademoiselle de la Valliere, and had saluted her with the profoundest respect, at which Louise blushed and could not say a word. Montalais, however, hurried to her assistance. "Well, Monsieur le Vicomte, here we are, you see." "I do, indeed, see you," said Raoul, smiling, "and it is exactly because you are here that I wish to ask for some explanation." Malicorne approached the group with his most fascinating smile. "Go away, Malicorne. Really, you are exceedingly indiscreet." At this remark, Malicorne bit his lips and retired a few steps, without making any reply. His smile, however, changed its expression, and from its former frankness, became mocking in its expression. "You wish for an explanation, M. Raoul?" inquired Montalais. "It is surely worth one, I think. Mademoiselle de la Valliere, maid of honor to Madame." "Why should not you be a maid of honor, as well as myself?" inquired Montalais. "Pray accept my compliments, young ladies," said Raoul, who fancied he perceived they were not disposed to answer him in a direct manner. "Your remark was not made in a very complimentary manner, Vicomte." "Mine?" "Certainly. I appeal to Louise." "M. de Bragelonne probably thinks a position is above my condition," said Louise, hesitatingly. "Assuredly not," replied Raoul, eagerly. "You know very well that such is not my feeling. Were you called upon to occupy a queen's throne, I should not be surprised. How much greater reason, then, such a position as this? The only circumstance that amazes me is that I should have learned it only today, and that by the merest accident." "That is true," replied Montalais, with a usual giddiness. "You know nothing about it, and there is no reason you should. M. de Bragelonne had written several letters to you, but your mother was the only person who remained behind at Blois, and it was necessary to prevent these letters falling into her hands. I intercepted them, and returned them to M. Raoul, so that he believed you were still at Blois while you were here in Paris, and had no idea whatever, indeed, how high you had risen in rank. Did you not inform M. Raoul, as I begged you to do?" "Why should I? To give him an opportunity or making some of his severe remarks and moral reflections, and to undo what we had so much trouble in effecting? Certainly not." "Am I so very severe, then?" said Raoul, inquiringly. "Besides," said Montalais, "it is sufficient to say that it suited me. I was about setting off for Paris. You were away." Louise was weeping her eyes out. "Interpret that as you please. I beg a friend, a protector of mine, who had obtained the appointment for me, to solicit one for Louise. The appointment arrived. Louise left an order to get a costume prepared, as I had my own ready. I remained behind. I received your letters and returned them to you, adding a few words, promising you a surprise. Your surprise is before you, monsieur, and seems to be a fair one enough. You have nothing more to ask. Come, M. Malicorne. It is now time to leave these young people together. They have many things to talk about. Give me your hand. I trust that you appreciate the honor conferred upon you, M. Malicorne." "Forgive me," said Raoul, arresting the giddy girl, and giving to his voice an intonation, the gravity of which contrasted with that of Montalais. "Forgive me, but may I inquire the name of the protector you speak of? For if protection be extended towards you, Mademoiselle Montalais, for which, indeed, so many reasons exist," added Raoul, bowing. "I do not see that the same reasons exist why Mademoiselle de la Valliere should be similarly cared for." "But, M. Raoul," said Louise, innocently, There's no difference in the matter, and I do not see why I should not tell you myself. It was M. Malicorne who obtained it for me. Raoul remained for a moment almost stupefied, asking himself if they were trifling with him. He then turned round to interrogate Malicorne, but he had been hurried away by Montalais, and was already at some distance from them. Mademoiselle de la Valliere attempted to follow her friend, but Raoul, with gentle authority, detained her. "Louise, one word, I beg." "But, M. Raoul," said Louise, blushing, "we are alone. Every one has left. They will become anxious, and will be looking for us." "Fear nothing," said the young man, smiling. "We are neither of us of sufficient importance for our absence to be remarked. But I have my duty to perform, M. Raoul. Do not be alarmed. I am acquainted with these usages of the court. You will not be on duty until tomorrow. A few minutes at your disposal, which will enable you to give me the information I am about to have the honor to ask you for." "How serious you are, M. Raoul," said Louise. "Because the circumstances are serious. Are you listening?" "I am listening. I would only repeat, monsieur, that we are quite alone." "You are right," said Raoul, and, offering her his hand, he led the young girl into the gallery adjoining the reception room, the windows of which looked out upon the courtyard. Every one hurried towards the middle window, which had a balcony outside, from which all the details of the slow and formal preparations for departure could be seen. Raoul opened one of the side windows, and then, being alone with Louise, said to her, "You know, Louise, that from my childhood I have regarded you as my sister, as one who has been the confidant of all my troubles, to whom I have entrusted all my hopes." "Yes, M. Raoul," she answered softly. "Yes, M. Raoul, I know that. You used, on your side, to show the same friendship towards me, and had the same confidence in me. Why have you not, on this occasion, been my friend? Why have you shown suspicion of me?" Mademoiselle de la Valliere did not answer. "I fondly thought you loved me," said Raoul, whose voice became more and more agitated. "I fondly thought you consented to all the plans we had, together, laid down for our own happiness, at the time when we wandered up and down the walks of Courcheverny, under the avenue of poplar trees leading to Blois. You do not answer me, Louise. Is it possible," he inquired, breathing with difficulty, "that you no longer love me?" "I did not say so," replied Louise, softly. "Oh, tell me the truth, I implore you. All my hopes in life are centered in you. I chose you for your gentle and simple tastes. Do not suffer yourself to be dazzled, Louise. Now that you are in the midst of a court where all that is pure too soon becomes corrupt, where all that is young too soon grows old. Louise, close your ears, so as not to hear what may be said. Shut your eyes, so as not to see the examples before you. Shut your lips, that you may not inhale the corrupting influences about you. Without falsehood or subterfuge. Louise, am I to believe what Mademoiselle de Montalais stated? Louise, did you come to Paris because I was no longer at Blois?" La Valliere blushed and concealed her face in her hands. "Yes, it was so. Then," exclaimed Raoul delightedly, "then, your reason for coming here. I love you as I never yet loved you. Thanks, Louise, for this devotion. But measures must be taken to place you beyond all insult, to shield you from every lay. Louise, a maid of honor in the court of a young princess in these days of free manners and inconstant affections. A maid of honor is placed as an object of attack without having any means of defense afforded her. This state of things cannot continue. You must be married in order to be respected." "Married? Yes, here is my hand. Louise, will you place yours within it? But your father?" "My father leaves me perfectly free." "Yet—" "I understand your scruples, Louise. I will consult my father." "Reflect, Emerald. Wait." "Wait. It is impossible." "Reflect, Louise, when you are concerned. It would be insulting. Give me your hand. Dear Louise, I am my own master. My father will consent. I know. Give me your hand. Do not keep me waiting thus. One word in answer. One word only. If not, I shall begin to think that, in order to change you forever, nothing more was needed than a single step in the palace, a single breath of favor, a smile from the queen, a look from the king." Raoul had no sooner pronounced this latter word than La Valliere became as pale as death, no doubt from fear at seeing the young man excite himself. With a movement as rapid as thought, she placed both her hands in those of Raoul, and then fled without adding a syllable, disappearing without casting a look behind her. Raoul felt his whole frame tremble at the contact of her hand. He received a compact as a solemn bargain wrung by affection from a childlike timidity. Chapter 90. The Consent of Athos. Raoul quitted the Palais Royal full of ideas that admitted no delay in execution. He mounted his horse in the courtyard and followed the road to Beauvais, while the marriage festivities of Monsieur and the Princess of England were being celebrated with exceeding animation by the courtiers, but to the despair of de Guiche and Buckingham. Raoul lost no time on the road, and in 16 hours he arrived at Beauvais. As he traveled along, he marshaled his arguments in the most becoming manner. Fever also is an argument that cannot be answered, and Raoul had an attack. Athos was in his study, making additions to his memoirs, when Raoul entered, accompanied by Grimaud. Keen-sighted and penetrating, a mere glance at his son told him that something extraordinary had befallen him. "You seem to come on a matter of importance," said he to Raoul, after he had embraced him, pointing to a seat. "Yes, monsieur," replied the young man, "and I entreat you to give me the same kind attention that has never yet failed me." "Speak, Raoul." "I present the case to you, monsieur, free from all preface, for that will be unworthy of you. Mademoiselle de la Valliere is in Paris as one of Madame's maids of honor. I have pondered deeply on the matter. I love Mademoiselle de la Valliere above everything, and it is not proper to leave her in a position where her reputation, her virtue even, may be assailed. It is my wish, therefore, to marry her, monsieur, and I have come to solicit your consent to my marriage." While this communication was being made to him, Athos maintained the profoundest silence and reserve. Raoul, who had begun his address with an assumption of self-possession, finished it by allowing a manifest emotion to escape him at every word. Athos fixed upon Bragelonne a searching look, overshadowed indeed by a slight sadness. "You have reflected well upon it?" he inquired. "Yes, monsieur." "I believe you are already acquainted with my views respecting this alliance." "Yes, monsieur," replied Raoul in a low tone of voice, "but you added that if I persisted." "You do persist, then—" Bragelonne stammered out an almost unintelligible assent. "Your passion," continued Athos, tranquilly, "must indeed be very great, since, notwithstanding my dislike to this union, you persist in wishing it." Raoul passed his trembling hand across his forehead to remove the perspiration that collected there. Athos looked at him, and his heart was touched by pity. He rose and said, "It is no matter. My own personal feelings are not to be taken into consideration, since yours are concerned. You need my assistance. I am ready to give it. Tell me what you want." "Your kind indulgence, first of all, monsieur," said Raoul, taking hold of his hand. "You have mistaken my feelings. Raoul, I have more than mere indulgence for you in my heart." Raoul kissed as devotedly as a lover could have done the hand he held in his own. "Come, come," said Athos, "I am quite ready. What do you wish me to sign?" "Nothing whatever, monsieur. Only it would be very kind if you would take the trouble to write to the king to whom I belong, and solicit his majesty's permission for me to marry Mademoiselle de la Valliere." "Well thought, Raoul. After, or rather before myself, you have a master to consult, that master being the king. It is loyal in you to submit yourself voluntarily to this double proof. I will grant your request without delay, Raoul." The count approached the window, and leaning out, called to Grimaud, who showed his head from an arbor covered with jasmine, which he was occupied in trimming. "My horses, Grimaud," continued the count. "Why this order, monsieur?" inquired Raoul. "We shall set off in a few hours." "Whither?" "For Paris." "Paris, monsieur? Is not the king at Paris?" "Certainly." "Well, ought we not to go there?" "Yes, Monsieur, said Raoul, almost alarmed by this kind condescension. I do not ask you to put yourself to such inconvenience, and a letter merely. You mistake my position, Raoul. It is not respectful that a simple gentleman, such as I am, should write to his sovereign. I wish to speak, I ought to speak, to the king, and I will do so. We will go together, Raoul. You overpower me with your kindness, monsieur. How do you think His Majesty is affected? Towards me, monsieur. Yes, excellently well disposed. You know that to be so, continued the Count. The king has himself told me so. On what occasion? Upon the recommendation of M. d'Artagnan, I believe, and on account of an affair in the Place de Grève, when I had the honor to draw my sword in the king's service. I have reason to believe that, vanity apart, I stand well with His Majesty. So much the better. But I entreat you, monsieur, pursued Raoul, not to maintain towards me your present grave and serious manner. Do not make me bitterly regret having listened to a feeling stronger than anything else. That is the second time you have said so, Raoul. It was quite unnecessary. You require my formal consent, and you have it. We need talk no more on the subject. Therefore, come and see my new plantations, Raoul. The young man knew very well that, after the expression of his father's wish, no opportunity of discussion was left him. He bowed his head and followed his father into the garden. Athos slowly pointed out to him the grafts, the cuttings, and the avenues he was planting. This perfect repose of manner disconcerted Raoul extremely. The affection with which his own heart was filled seemed so great that the whole world could hardly contain it. How, then, could his father's heart remain void and closed to its influence? Bragelonne, therefore, collecting all his courage, suddenly exclaimed, "It is impossible, monsieur, you can have any reason to reject Mademoiselle de la Valliere? In heaven's name, she is so good, so gentle and pure, that your mind, so perfect in its penetration, ought to appreciate her accordingly. Does any secret repugnance, or any hereditary dislike, exist between you and her family? Look, Raoul, at that beautiful lily of the valley," said Athos. "Observe how the shade and the damp situation suit it, particularly the shadow which its sycamore tree casts over it, so that the warmth, and not the blazing heat of the sun, filters through its leaves." Raoul stopped, bit his lips, and then with the blood mantling in his face, he said courageously, "One word of explanation, I beg, monsieur. You cannot forget that your son is a man." "In that case," replied Athos, drawing himself up with sternness, "prove to me that you are a man, for you do not show yourself a son. I begged you to wait the opportunity of forming an illustrious alliance. I would have obtained a wife for you from the first ranks of the rich nobility. I wish you to be distinguished by the splendor which glory and fortune confer, for nobility of descent you have already." "Monsieur," exclaimed Raoul, carried away by a first impulse, "I was reproached the other day for not knowing who my mother was." Athos turned pale. Then, knitting his brows like the greatest of all the heathen deities, "I am waiting to learn the reply you made," he demanded, in an imperious manner. "Forgive me." "Oh, forgive me," murmured the young man, sinking at once from the lofty tone he had assumed. "What was your reply, monsieur?" inquired the Count, stamping his feet upon the ground. "Monsieur, my sword was in my hand immediately. My adversary placed himself on guard. I struck his sword over the palisade, and threw him after it." "Why did you suffer him to live?" "The king has prohibited dueling, and, at that moment, I was an ambassador of the king." "Very well," said Athos, "but all the greater reason I should see His Majesty." "What do you intend to ask him?" "Authority to draw my sword against the man who has inflicted this injury upon me. If I did not act as I ought to have done, I beg you to forgive me. Did I reproach you, Raoul? Still, the permission you are going to ask from the king. I will implore His Majesty to sign your marriage contract, but on one condition." "Are conditions necessary with me, monsieur? Command, and you shall be obeyed." "On one condition. I repeat, continued Athos, that you tell me the name of the man who spoke of your mother in that way. What need is there that you should know his name? The offense was directed against myself, and the permission once obtained from His Majesty to revenge it is my affair. Tell me his name, monsieur. I will not allow you to expose yourself. Do you take me for Don Diego? His name, I say. You insist upon it. I demand it. The Vicomte de Wardes. Very well, said Athos, tranquilly. I know him, but our horses are ready, I see, and instead of delaying our departure for a couple of hours, we will set off at once. Come, monsieur. Chapter 91. Monsieur becomes jealous of the Duke of Buckingham. While the Comte de la Fere was proceeding on his way to Paris, accompanied by Raoul, the Pellereau was a theatre wherein a scene of what Molière would have called excellent comedy was being performed. For days had elapsed since his marriage, and Monsieur, having breakfasted very hurriedly, passed into his antechamber, frowning and out of temper. The repast had not been over-agreeable. Madame had had breakfast served in her own apartment, and Monsieur had breakfasted almost alone. The Chevalier de Lorraine and Manicamp were the only persons present at the meal, which lasted 3/4 of an hour without a single syllable having been uttered. Manicamp, who was less intimate with His Royal Highness than the Chevalier de Lorraine, vainly endeavored to detect, from the expression of the prince's face, what had made him so ill-humored. The Chevalier de Lorraine, who had no occasion to speculate about anything, anasmic as he knew all, ate his breakfast with that extraordinary appetite which the troubles of one's friends but stimulates, and enjoyed at the same time both Monsieur's ill humor and the vexation of Manicamp. He seemed delighted, while he went on eating, to detain the prince, who was very impatient to move, still at table. Monsieur at times repented the ascendancy which he had permitted the Chevalier de Lorraine to acquire over him, and which exempted the latter from any observance of etiquette towards him. Monsieur was now in one of those moods, but he dreaded as much as he liked the Chevalier, and contented himself with nursing his anger without betraying it. Every now and then Monsieur raised his eyes to the ceiling, then lowered them towards the slices of pate which the Chevalier was attacking, and finally, not caring to betray his resentment, he gesticulated in a manner which Harlequin might have envied. At last, however, Monsieur could control himself no longer, and at the dessert, rising from the table in excessive wrath, as we have related, he left the Chevalier de Lorraine to finish his breakfast as he pleased. Seeing Monsieur rise from the table, Manicamp, napkin in hand, rose also. Monsieur ran rather than walked towards the antechamber, where, noticing an usher in attendance, he gave him some directions in a low tone of voice. Then turning back again, but avoiding passing through the breakfast apartment, he crossed several rooms, with the intention of seeking the Queen Mother in her oratory, where she usually remained. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. Anne of Austria was engaged in writing as Monsieur entered. The Queen Mother was extremely attached to her son, for he was handsome in person and amiable in disposition. He was, in fact, more affectionate, and, it might be, more effeminate than the king. He pleased his mother by those trifling, sympathizing attentions all women are glad to receive. Anne of Austria, who would have been rejoiced to have had a daughter, almost found in this, her favorite son, the attentions, solicitude, and playful manners of a child of 12 years of age. All the time he passed with his mother he employed in admiring her arms, in giving his opinion upon her cosmetics, and receipts of compounding essences, in which he was very particular, and then, too, he kissed her hands and cheeks in the most childlike and endearing manner, and had always some sweetmeats to offer her, or some new style of dress to recommend. Anne of Austria loved the king, or rather the regal power in her eldest son, Louis XIV, represented legitimacy by right divine. With the king, her character was that of the Queen Mother. With Philip she was simply the mother. The latter knew that, of all places of refuge, a mother's heart is the most compassionate and surest. When quite a child, he always fled there for refuge when he and his brother quarreled, often after having struck him, which constituted the crime of high treason on his part, after certain engagements with hands and nails, in which the king and his rebellious subject indulged in their night dresses, respecting the right to a disputed bed, having their servant Laporte as umpire. Philip, conqueror, but terrified at victory, used to flee to his mother to obtain reinforcements from her, or at least the assurance of forgiveness, which Louis XIV granted with difficulty and after an interval, and, from this habit of peaceable intervention, succeeded in arranging the disputes of his sons and in sharing, at the same time, all their secrets. The king, somewhat jealous of that maternal solicitude which was bestowed particularly upon his brother, felt disposed to show towards and of Austria more submission and attachment than his character really dictated. And of Austria had adopted this line of conduct, especially towards the young queen. In this manner she ruled with almost despotic sway over the royal household, and she was already preparing her batteries to govern with the same absolute authority the household of a second son, and experienced almost a feeling of pride whenever she saw anyone enter her apartment with woebegone looks, pale cheeks, or red eyes, gathering from appearances that assistance was required either by the weakest or the most rebellious. She was writing, we have said, when Monsieur entered her oratory, not with red eyes or pale cheeks, but restless, out of temper, and annoyed. With an absent air he kissed his mother's hands, and set himself down before receiving her permission to do so. Considering the strict rules of etiquette established at the court of Austria, this forgetfulness of customary civilities was a sign of preoccupation, especially on Philip's part, who, of his own accord, observed a respect towards her of a somewhat exaggerated character. If, therefore, he so notoriously failed in this regard, there must be a serious cause for it. "What is the matter?" Philip inquired of Austria, turning towards his son. "A good many things," murmured the prince, in a doleful tone of voice. "You look like a man who has a great deal to do," said the queen, laying down her pen. Philip frowned, but did not reply. "Among the various subjects which occupy your mind," said Anne of Austria, "there must surely be one that absorbs it more than others." "One indeed has occupied me more than any other." "Well, what is it? I am listening." Philip opened his mouth as if to express all the troubles his mind was filled with, and which he seemed to be waiting only for an opportunity of declaring. But he suddenly became silent, and a sigh alone expressed all that his heart was overflowing with. "Come, Philip, show a little firmness," said the Queen Mother. "When one has a complaint of anything, it is generally an individual who is the cause of it. Am I not right?" "I do not say no, madam." "Whom do you wish to speak about? Come, take courage." "In fact, madam, what I might possibly have to say must be kept a profound secret, for when a lady is in the case—" "Ah, you are speaking of madam, then?" inquired the Queen Mother, with a feeling of the liveliest curiosity. "Yes." "Well, then, if you wish to speak of madam, do not hesitate to do so. I am your mother, and she is no more than a stranger to me. Yet, as she is my daughter-in-law, rest assured I shall be interested, even were it for your own sake alone, in hearing all you may have to say about her. Pray tell me, madam, in your tone, whether you have not remarked something." "Something? Philip, your words almost frighten me, from their want of meaning. What do you mean by something?" "Madam is pretty, certainly. No doubt of it. Yet not altogether beautiful." "No, but as she grows older, she will probably become strikingly beautiful. You must have remarked the change which a few years have already made in her. Her beauty will improve more and more. She is now only 16 years of age. At 15 I was, myself, very thin. But even as she is at present, madam is very pretty. And consequently others have remarked it. Undoubtedly, for a woman of ordinary rank is noticed, and with still greater reason a princess. She has been well brought up, I suppose." Madame Henrietta, her mother, is a woman somewhat cold in manner, slightly pretentious, but full of noble thoughts. The princess's education may have been neglected, but her principles, I believe, are good. Such at least was the opinion I formed of her when she resided in France. But she afterwards returned to England, and I am ignorant what may have occurred there." "What do you mean?" "Simply that there are some heads naturally giddy, which are easily turned by prosperity." "That is the very word, madam. I think the princess rather giddy." We must not exaggerate, Philip. She is clever and witty, and has a certain amount of coquetry very natural in a young woman. But this defect in persons of high rank and position is a great advantage at a court. A princess who is tinged with coquetry usually forms a brilliant court around her. Her smile stimulates luxury, arouses wit, and even courage. The nobles, too, fight better for a prince whose wife is beautiful. Thank you extremely, madam, said Philip, with some temper. You really have drawn some very alarming pictures for me. In what respect? Asked the queen, with pretended simplicity. You know, madam, said Philip, dolefully, whether I had or had not a very great dislike to getting married. Now, indeed, you alarm me. You have some serious cause of complaint against madam. I do not precisely say it is serious. In that case, then, throw aside your doleful looks. If you show yourself to others in your present state, people will take you for a very unhappy husband. The fact is, replied Philip, I am not altogether satisfied as a husband, and I shall not be sorry if others know it. For shame, Philip. Well, then, madam, I will tell you frankly that I do not understand the life I am required to lead. Explain yourself. My wife does not seem to belong to me. She is always leaving me for some reason or another. In the mornings there are visits, correspondences, and toilettes. In the evenings, balls and concerts. You are jealous, Philip. Heaven forbid. Let others act the part of a jealous husband, not I. But I am annoyed. All these things you reproach your wife are the perfectly innocent, and so long as you have nothing of greater importance. Yet, listen, without being very blamable, a woman can excite a good deal of uneasiness. Certain visitors may be received, certain preferences shown, which expose young women to remark, and which are enough to drive out of their senses even those husbands who are least disposed to be jealous. Now we are coming to the real point at last, and not without some difficulty. You speak of frequent visits, and certain preferences. Very good. For the last hour we have been beating about the bush, and at last you have broached the true question. This is more serious than I thought. It is possible, then, that madam can have given you grounds for the complaints against her. Precisely so. What? Your wife, married only 4 days ago, prefers some other person to yourself. Take care. Philip, you exaggerate your grievances. In wishing to prove everything, you prove nothing. The prince, bewildered by his mother's serious manner, wished to reply, but he could only stammer out some unintelligible words. You draw back, then, said Anne of Austria. I prefer that, as it is an acknowledgment of your mistake. No, exclaimed Philip, I do not draw back, and I will prove all I asserted. I spoke of preference and of visits. Did I not? Well, listen. Anne of Austria prepared herself to listen, with that love of gossip which the best woman living and the best mother, were she a queen even, always finds in being mixed up with the petty squabbles of a household. Well, said Philip, tell me one thing. What is that? Why does my wife retain an English court about her? Said Philip, as he crossed his arms and looked his mother steadily in the face, as if he were convinced that she could not answer the question. For a very simple reason, returned Anne of Austria. Because the English are her countrymen, because they have expended large sums in order to accompany her to France, and because it would be hardly polite, not politic, certainly, to dismiss abruptly those members of the English nobility who have not shrunk from any devotion or from any sacrifice. A wonderful sacrifice indeed, returned Philip, to desert a wretched country to come to a beautiful one, where a greater effect can be produced for a crown than can be procured elsewhere for 4. Extraordinary devotion. Really, to travel 100 leagues in company with a woman one is in love with. In love. Philip, think what you are saying. Who is in love with madam? The Duke of Buckingham. Perhaps you will defend him, too. Anne of Austria blushed and smiled at the same time. The name of the Duke of Buckingham recalled certain recollections of a very tender and melancholy nature. The Duke of Buckingham, she murmured. Yes, one of those armchair soldiers. The Buckinghams are loyal and brave, said Anne of Austria, courageously. "This is too bad. My own mother takes a part of my wife's love against me," exclaimed Philip, incensed to such an extent that his weak organization was affected almost to tears. "Philip, my son," exclaimed Anne of Austria, "such an expression is unworthy of you. Your wife has no lover, and, had she one, it would not be the Duke of Buckingham. The members of that family, I repeat, are loyal and discreet, and the rights of hospitality are sure to be respected by them." "The Duke of Buckingham is an Englishman, madam," said Philip. "And may I ask if the English so very religiously respect what belongs to princes of France?" And blushed a second time, and turned aside under the pretext of taking a pen from her desk again, but in reality to conceal her confusion from her son. "Really, Philip," she said, "you seem to discover expressions for the purpose of embarrassing me, and your anger blinds you while it alarms me. Reflect a little." "There is no need for reflection. Madam, I can see with my own eyes." "Well, and what do you see?" "That Buckingham never quits my wife. He presumes to make presents to her, and she ventures to accept them. Yesterday she was talking about sachets of la violette. Well, our French perfumers, you know very well, madam, for you have over and over again asked for it without success. Our French perfumers, I say, have never been able to procure this scent. The Duke, however, wore about him a sachet of la violette, and I am sure that the one my wife has came from him." "Indeed, monsieur," said Anne of Austria, "you build your pyramids on needle points. Be careful. What harm, I ask you, can there be in a man giving to his countrywoman a receipt for a new essence? These strange ideas, I protest, painfully recall your father to me. He who so frequently and so unjustly made me suffer." "The Duke of Buckingham's father was probably more reserved and more respectful than his son," said Philip, thoughtlessly, not perceiving how deeply he had wounded his mother's feelings. The Queen turned pale and pressed her clenched hands upon her bosom. But, recovering herself immediately, she said, "You came here with some intention or another, I suppose." "Certainly." "What was it?" "I came, madam, intending to complain energetically, and to inform you that I will not submit to such behavior from the Duke of Buckingham." "What do you intend to do, then?" "I shall complain to the king." "And what do you expect the king to reply?" "Very well, then," said monsieur, with an expression of stern determination on his countenance, which offered a singular contrast to its usual gentleness. "Very well, I will right myself." "What do you call righting yourself?" inquired Anne of Austria, in alarm. "I will have the Duke of Buckingham quit the princess. I will have him quit France, and I will see that my wishes are intimated to him." "You will intimate nothing of the kind, Philip," said the Queen, "for if you act in that manner, and violate hospitality to that extent, I will invoke the severity of the king against you." "Do you threaten me, madam?" exclaimed Philip, almost in tears. "Do you threaten me in the midst of my complaints?" "I do not threaten you. I do but place an obstacle in the path of your hasty anger. I maintain that, to adopt towards the Duke of Buckingham, or any other Englishman, any rigorous measure, to take even a discourteous step towards him, would be to plunge France and England into the most disastrous disagreement. Can it be possible that a prince of the blood, the brother of the King of France, does not know how to hide an injury, even did it exist in reality, where political necessity requires it?" Philip made a movement. "Besides," continued the Queen, "the injury is neither true nor possible, and it is merely a matter of silly jealousy." "Madam, I know what I know." "Whatever you may know, I can only advise you to be patient." "I am not patient by disposition, madam." The Queen rose, full of severity, and with an icy ceremonious manner. "Explain what you really require, monsieur," she said. "I do not require anything. Madam, I simply express what I desire. If the Duke of Buckingham does not, of his own accord, discontinue his visits to my apartments, I shall forbid him entrance." "That is a point you will refer to the king," said Anne of Austria, her heart swelling as she spoke, and her voice trembling with emotion. "But, madam," exclaimed Philip, striking his hands together, "act as my mother and not as the Queen, Since I speak to you as a son, it is simply a matter of a few minutes' conversation between the Duke and myself." "It is that very conversation I forbid," said the Queen, resuming her authority, "because it is unworthy of you. Be it so. I will not appear in the matter, but I shall intimate my will to Madam." "Oh," said the Queen Mother, with a melancholy arising from reflection, "never tyrannize over a wife. Never behave too haughtily or imperiously towards your own. A woman unwillingly convinced is unconvinced. What is to be done? Then I will consult my friends about it. Yes, your double-dealing advisers, your Chevalier de Lorraine, your De Wards. Entrust the conduct of this affair to me. You wish the Duke of Buckingham to leave, do you not?" "As soon as possible. Madam, send the Duke to me. Then smile upon your wife, behave to her, to the king, to everyone, as usual. But follow no advice but mine. Alas, I too well know what any household comes to that is troubled by advisers. You shall be obeyed, madam, and you will be satisfied at the result. Send the Duke to me. That will not be difficult. Where do you suppose him to be?" "At my wife's door, whose levee he is probably awaiting." "Very well," said Anne of Austria, calmly. "Be good enough to tell the Duke that I shall be charmed if he will pay me a visit." Philip kissed his mother's hand and started off to find the Duke of Buckingham. Chapter 92. Forever. The Duke of Buckingham, obedient to the Queen Mother's invitation, presented himself in her apartments half an hour after the departure of the Duc d'Orleans. When his name was announced by the gentleman usher in attendance, the Queen, who was sitting with her elbow resting on a table and her head buried in her hands, rose and smilingly received the graceful and respectful salutation which the Duke addressed to her. Anne of Austria was still beautiful. It is well known that at a then somewhat advanced age, her long auburn hair, perfectly formed hands, and bright ruby lips were still the admiration of all who saw her. On the present occasion, abandoned entirely to a remembrance which evoked all the past in her heart, she looked almost as beautiful as in the days of her youth, when her palace was open to the visits of the Duke of Buckingham's father, then a young and impassioned man, as well as an unfortunate prince, who lived for her alone and died with her name upon his lips. Anne of Austria fixed upon Buckingham a look so tender in its expression that it denoted not alone the indulgence of maternal affection, but a gentleness of expression like the coquetry of a woman who loves. "Your Majesty," said Buckingham, respectfully, "desired to speak to me." "Yes, Duke," said the Queen, in English. "Will you be good enough to sit down?" The favor which Anne of Austria thus extended to the young man, and the welcome sound of the language of a country from which the Duke had been estranged since his stay in France, deeply affected him. He immediately conjectured that the Queen had a request to make of him. After having abandoned the first few moments to the irrepressible emotion she experienced, the Queen resumed the smiling air with which she had received him. "What do you think of France?" she said, in French. "It is a lovely country, madam," replied the Duke. "Had you ever seen it before?" "Once only, madam." "But, like all true Englishmen, you prefer England." "I prefer my own native land to France," replied the Duke. "But if your Majesty were to ask me which of the two cities, London or Paris, I should prefer as a residence, I should be forced to answer Paris." Anne of Austria observed the ardent manner with which these words had been pronounced. "I am told, my lord, you have rich possessions in your own country, and that you live in a splendid and time-honored palace." "It was my father's residence," replied Buckingham, casting down his eyes. "Those are indeed great advantages and souvenirs," replied the Queen, alluding, in spite of herself, to recollections from which it is impossible voluntarily to detach oneself. "In fact," said the Duke, yielding to the melancholy influence of this opening conversation, "sensitive persons live as much in the past or the future as in the present." "That is very true," said the Queen, in a low tone of voice. "It follows, then, my lord," she added, "that you, who are a man of feeling, will soon quit France in order to shut yourself up with your wealth and your relics of the past." Buckingham raised his head and said, "I think not, madam." "What do you mean?" On the contrary, I think of leaving England in order to take up my residence in France. It was now Anne of Austria's turn to exhibit surprise. Why, she said, are you not in favor with the new king? Perfectly so, madam, for his majesty's kindness to me is unbounded. It cannot, said the queen, be because your fortune is diminished, for it is said to be enormous. My income, madam, has never been so large. There is some secret cause, then. No, madam, said Buckingham, eagerly, there is nothing secret in my reason for this determination. I prefer residence in France. I like a court so distinguished by its refinement and courtesy. I like the amusements, somewhat serious in their nature, which are not the amusements of my own country, and which are met with in France. Anne of Austria smiled shrewdly. Amusements of a serious nature, she said. Has your grace well reflected on their seriousness? The Duke hesitated. There is no amusement so serious, continued the Queen, as to prevent a man of your rank. Your Majesty seems to insist greatly on that point, interrupted the Duke. Do you think so, my lord? If you will forgive me for saying so, it is the second time you have vaunted the attractions of England at the expense of the delight which all experience who live in France. Anne of Austria approached the young man, and placing a beautiful hand upon his shoulder, which trembled at the touch, said, Believe me, monsieur, nothing can equal a residence in one's own native country. I have very frequently had occasion to regret Spain. I have lived long, my lord, very long for a woman, and I confess to you that not a year has passed I have not regretted Spain. Not 1 year, madam, said the young Duke coldly. Not one of those years when you reigned Queen of Beauty, as you still are, indeed. A truce to flattery, Duke, for I am old enough to be your mother. She emphasized these latter words in a manner, and with a gentleness, which penetrated Buckingham's heart. Yes, she said, I am old enough to be your mother, and for this reason I will give you a word of advice. That advice being that I should return to London, he exclaimed. Yes, my lord. The Duke clasped his hands with a terrified gesture which could not fail of its effect upon the Queen, already disposed to softer feelings by the tenderness of her own recollections. It must be so, added the Queen. What? He again exclaimed. Am I seriously told that I must leave, that I must exile myself, that I am to flee at once? Exile yourself, did you say? One would fancy France was your native country. Madam, the country of those who love is the country of those whom they love. Not another word, my lord, you forget whom you are addressing. Buckingham threw himself on his knees. Madam, you are the source of intelligence, of goodness, and of compassion. You are the first person in this kingdom, not only by your rank, but the first person in the world on account of your angelic attributes. I have said nothing. Madam, have I, indeed, said anything you should answer with such a cruel remark? What have I betrayed? You have betrayed yourself, said the Queen, in a low tone of voice. I have said nothing. I know nothing. You forget you have spoken and thought in the presence of a woman, and besides, said the Duke, no one knows you are listening to me. On the contrary, it is known you have all the defects and all the qualities of youth. I have been betrayed or denounced. Then, by whom? By those who, at Havre, had, with infernal perspicacity, read my heart like an open book. I do not know whom you mean. M. de Bragelonne, for instance. I know the name without being acquainted with the person to whom it belongs. M. de Bragelonne has said nothing. Who can it be, then? If anyone, madam, had had the boldness to notice in me that which I do not myself wish to behold. What would you do, Duke? There are secrets which kill those who discover them. He, then, who has discovered your secret, madman that you are, still lives, and, what is more, you will not slay him, for he is armed on all sides. He is a husband, a jealous man. He is the second gentleman in France. He is my son, the Duc d'Orleans. The Duke turned pale as death. You are very cruel, madam, he said. You see, Buckingham, said Anne of Austria, sadly, how you pass from one extreme to another and fight with shadows when it would seem so easy to remain at peace with yourself. If we fight, madam, we die on the field of battle, replied the young man, gently, abandoning himself to the most gloomy depression, and ran towards him and took him by the hand. Vieux, she said, in English, with a vehemence of tone which nothing could resist. What is it you ask? Do you ask a mother to sacrifice a son, a queen to consent to the dishonor of her house? Child that you are, do not dream of it. What? In order to spare your tears am I to commit these crimes? Vieux, you speak of the dead. The dead, at least, were full of respect and submission. They resigned themselves to an order of exile. They carried their despair away with them in their hearts, like a priceless possession, because the despair was caused by the woman they loved, and because death, thus deceptive, was like a gift or favor conferred upon them. Buckingham rose, his features distorted, and his hands pressed against his heart. You are right, madam, he said, but those of whom you speak had received their order of exile from the lips of the one whom they loved. They were not driven away. They were entreated to leave and were not laughed at. No, murmured Anne of Austria, they were not forgotten. But who says you are driven away, or that you are exiled? Who says that your devotion will not be remembered? I do not speak on any one's behalf but my own when I tell you to leave. Do me this kindness. Grant me this favor. Let me, for this also, be indebted to one of your name. It is for your sake. Then, madam, for mine alone, no one whom I shall leave behind me will venture to mock. No prince even who shall say, I required it. Listen to me, Duke. And hereupon the dignified features of the queen assumed a solemn expression. I swear to you that no one commands in this matter but myself. I swear to you that not only shall no one either laugh or boast in any way, but no one even shall fail in the respect due to your rank. Rely upon me, Duke, as I rely upon you. You do not explain yourself. Madam, my heart is full of bitterness, and I am in utter despair. No consolation, however gentle and affectionate, can afford me relief. Do you remember your mother, Duke? Replied the queen, with a winning smile. Very slightly, madam, yet I remember how she used to cover me with her caresses and her tears whenever I wept. Vieux, murmured the queen, passing her arm round the young man's neck, look upon me as your mother, and believe that no one shall ever make my son weep. I thank you, madam, said the young man, affected and almost suffocated by his emotion. I feel there is indeed still room in my heart for a gentler and nobler sentiment than love. The queen mother looked at him and pressed his hand. Go, she said. When must I leave? Command me. At any time that may suit you, my lord, resumed the queen. You will choose your own day of departure. Instead, however, of setting off today, as you would doubtless wish to do, or tomorrow, as others may have expected, leave the day after tomorrow in the evening, but announce the day that it is your wish to leave. My wish? Murmured the young duke. Yes, Duke. And shall I never return to France? Anne of Austria reflected for a moment, seemingly absorbed in sad and serious thought. It would be a consolation for me, she said, if you were to return on the day when I shall be carried to my final resting place at Saint Denis beside the king, my husband. Madam, you are goodness itself. The tide of prosperity is setting in on you. Your cup brims over with happiness, and many long years are yet before you. In that case you will not come for some time. Then, said the queen, endeavoring to smile. I shall not return, said Buckingham. Young as I am, death does not reckon by years. It is impartial. Some die young, some reach old age. I will not harbor any sorrowful ideas, Duke. Let me comfort you. Return in 2 years. I perceive from your face that the very idea which saddens you so much now will have disappeared before 6 months have passed, and will be not only dead but forgotten in the period of absence I have assigned you. I think you judged me better a little while ago, madam, replied the young man, when you said that time is powerless against members of the family of Buckingham. Silence, said the queen, kissing the duke upon the forehead with an affection she could not restrain. Go, go, spare me and forget yourself no longer. I am the queen. You are the subject of the King of England. King Charles awaits your return. Adieu, Viers, farewell. Forever, replied the young man, and he fled, endeavoring to master his emotion, and leaned her head upon her hands, and then looking at herself in the glass, murmured, "It has been truly said that a woman who is truly loved is always young, and that the bloom of 20 years ever lies concealed in some secret cloister of the heart." Chapter 93. King Louis XIV does not think Mademoiselle de la Valliere either rich enough or pretty enough for a gentleman of the rank of the Vicomte de Bragelonne. Raoul and the Comte de la Fere reached Paris the evening of the same day on which Buckingham had held the conversation with the Queen Mother. The Count had scarcely arrived when, through Raoul, he solicited an audience of the king. His Majesty had passed a portion of the morning in looking over, with Madame and the ladies of the court, various goods of Lyon's manufacture, of which he had made his sister-in-law a present. A court dinner had succeeded, then cards, and afterwards, according to his usual custom, the king, leaving the card tables at 8 o'clock, passed into his cabinet in order to work with M. Colbert and M. Fouquet. Raoul entered the antechamber at the very moment the two ministers quitted it, and the king, perceiving him through the half-closed door, said, "What do you want, M. de Bragelonne?" The young man approached. "An audience, sire," he replied, "for the Comte de la Fere, who has just arrived from Blois, and is most anxious to have an interview with your Majesty." "I have an hour to spare between cards and supper," said the king. "Is the Comte de la Fere at hand?" "He is below and awaits your Majesty's permission." "Let him come up at once," said the king, and 5 minutes afterwards Athos entered the presence of Louis XIV. He was received by the king with that gracious kindness of manner which Louis, with a tact beyond his years, reserved for the purpose of gaining those who were not to be conquered by ordinary favors. "Let me hope, Comte," said the king, "that you have come to ask me for something." "I will not conceal from your Majesty," replied the Comte, "that I am indeed come for that purpose." "That is well," said the king, joyously. "It is not for myself, sire. So much the worse. But, at least, I will do for your protégé what you refuse to permit me to do for you. Your Majesty encourages me. I have come to speak on behalf of the Vicomte de Bragelonne. It is the same as if you spoke on your own behalf, Comte." "Not altogether so, sire. I am desirous of obtaining from your Majesty that which I cannot ask for myself. The Vicomte thinks of marrying. He is still very young, but that does not matter. He is an eminently distinguished man. I will choose a wife for him. He has already chosen one, sire, and only awaits your consent. It is only a question, then, of signing the marriage contract." Athos bowed. "Has he chosen a wife whose fortune and position accord with your own anticipations?" Athos hesitated for a moment. "His affianced wife is of good birth, but has no fortune." "That is a misfortune we can remedy." "You overwhelm me with gratitude, sire, but your Majesty will permit me to offer a remark." "Do so, Comte." "Your Majesty seems to intimate an intention of giving a marriage portion to this young lady." "Certainly. I should regret, sire, if the step I have taken toward your Majesty should be attended by this result." "No false delicacy. Comte, what is the bride's name?" "Mademoiselle de la Baume le Blanc de la Valliere," said Athos, coldly. "I seem to know that name," said the king, as if reflecting. "There was a Marquis de la Valliere." "Yes, sire, it is his daughter. But he died, and his widow married again into Saint Remy, I think, steward of the Wager Madame's former household. Your Majesty is correctly informed. More than that, the young lady has lately become one of the princess's maids of honor. Your Majesty is better acquainted with her history than I am." The king again reflected, and glancing at the Comte's anxious countenance, said, "The young lady does not seem to me to be very pretty, Comte." "I am not quite sure," replied Athos. "I have seen her, but she hardly struck me as being so. She seems to be a good and modest girl, but has little beauty. Sire, beautiful fair hair, however. I think so. And her blue eyes are tolerably good. Yes, sire. With regard to beauty, then the match is but an ordinary one. Now for the money side of the question. 15 to 20,000 francs dowry at the very outside. Sire, the lovers are disinterested enough. For myself, I care little for money. For superfluity, you mean, but a needful amount is of importance. With 15,000 francs, without landed property, a woman cannot live at court. We will make up the deficiency. I will do it for de Bragelonne. The king again remarked the coldness with which Athos received the remark. Let us pass from the question of money to that of rank, said Louis XIV. The daughter of the Marquis de la Valliere, that is well enough, but there is an excellent Saint Remy who somewhat damages the credit of the family, and you, Comte, are rather particular, I believe, about your own family. Sire, I no longer hold anything but my devotion to your majesty. The king again paused. A moment, Comte, you have surprised me in no little degree from the beginning of your conversation. You came to ask me to authorize a marriage, and you seem greatly disturbed in having to make the request. Nay, pardon me, Comte, but I am rarely deceived, young as I am. For while with some persons I place my friendship at the disposal of my understanding, with others I call my distrust of my aid, by which my discernment is increased. I repeat that you do not prefer your request, as though you wished its success. Well, sire, that is true. I do not understand you. Then refuse. Nay, sire, I love de Bragelonne with my whole heart. He is smitten with Mademoiselle de la Valliere. He weaves dreams of bliss for the future. I am not one who is willing to destroy the illusions of youth. This marriage is objectionable to me, but I implore your majesty to consent to it forthwith and thus make Raoul happy. Tell me, Comte, is she in love with him? If your majesty requires me to speak candidly, I do not believe in Mademoiselle de la Valliere's affection. The delight of being at court, the honor of being in the service of Madame, counteract in her head whatever affection she may happen to have in her heart. It is a marriage similar to many others which already exist at court, but de Bragelonne wishes it, and so let it be. And yet you do not resemble those easy-tempered fathers who volunteer stepping stones for their children, said the king. I am determined enough against the viciously disposed, but not so against men of upright character. Raoul is suffering. He is in great distress of mind. His disposition, naturally light and cheerful, has become gloomy and melancholy. I do not wish to deprive your majesty of the services he may be able to render. I understand you, said the king, and what is more, I understand your heart, too, Comte. There is no occasion, therefore, replied the Comte, to tell your majesty that my object is to make these children, or rather Raoul, happy. And I, too, as much as yourself, Comte, wish to secure de Bragelonne's happiness. I only await your majesty's signature. Raoul will have the honor of presenting himself before your majesty to receive your consent. You are mistaken, Comte, said the king, firmly. I have just said that I desire to secure de Bragelonne's happiness, and from the present moment, therefore, I oppose his marriage. But, sire, exclaimed Athos, your majesty has promised. Not so, Comte, I did not promise you, for it is opposed to my own views. I appreciate your majesty's considerate and generous intentions in my behalf, but I take the liberty of recalling to you that I undertook to approach you as an ambassador. An ambassador, Comte, frequently asks, but does not always obtain what he asks. But, sire, it will be such a blow for de Bragelonne. My hand shall deal the blow. I will speak to the Vicomte. Love, so, is overwhelming in its might. Love can be resisted. Comte, I myself can assure you of that. When one has the soul of a king, your own, for instance, sire, do not make yourself uneasy on the subject. I have certain views for de Bragelonne. I do not say that he shall not marry Mademoiselle de la Valliere, but I do not wish him to marry so young. I do not wish him to marry her until she has acquired a fortune. And he, on his side, no less deserves favor, such as I wish to confer upon him. In a word, Comte, I wish them to wait. Yet once more, Sire. Comte, you told me you came to request a favor. Assuredly, Sire. Grant me one. Then, instead, let us speak no longer upon this matter. It is probable that, before long, war may be declared. I require men about me who are unfettered. I should hesitate to send under fire a married man, or a father of a family. I should hesitate also, on the Bragelonne's account, to endow with a fortune, without some sound reason for it, a young girl, a perfect stranger. Such an act would sow jealousy amongst my nobility. Athos bowed and remained silent. Is that all you wish to ask me? Added Louis XIV. Absolutely all, sire, and I take my leave of your majesty. Is it, however, necessary that I should inform Raoul? Spare yourself the trouble and annoyance. Tell the Vicomte that at my levee tomorrow morning I will speak to him. I shall expect you this evening, Comte, to join my card table. I am in traveling costume, sire. A day will come, I hope, when you will leave me no more. Before long, Comte, the monarchy will be established in such a manner as to enable me to offer a worthy hospitality to men of your merit. Provided, sire, a monarch reigns grandly in the hearts of his subjects, the palace he inhabits matters little, since he is worshipped in a temple. With these words, Athos left the cabinet and found de Bragelonne, who was awaiting him anxiously. Well, monsieur, said the young man, the king, Raoul, is well-intentioned towards us both. Not, perhaps, in the sense you suppose, but he is kind and generously disposed to our house. You have bad news to communicate to me, monsieur, said the young man, turning very pale. The king himself will inform you tomorrow morning that it is not bad news. The king has not signed, however. The king wishes himself to settle the terms of the contract, and he desires to make it so grand that he requires time for consideration. Throw the blame rather on your own impatience than on the king's good feeling towards you. Raoul, in utter consternation, on account of his knowledge of the count's frankness as well as his diplomacy, remained plunged in dull and gloomy stupor. Will you not go with me to my lodgings? Said Athos. I beg your pardon, monsieur. I will follow you, he stammered out, following Athos down the staircase. Since I am here, said Athos, suddenly, cannot I see M. d'Artagnan? Shall I show you his apartments? Said de Bragelonne. Do so. They are on the opposite staircase. They altered their course, but on reaching the landing of the grand staircase, Raoul perceived a servant in the Comte de Guiche livery, who ran towards him as soon as he heard his voice. What is it? Said Raoul. This note, monsieur. My master heard of your return and wrote to you without delay. I have been looking for you for the last half hour. Raoul approached Athos as he unsealed the letter, saying, With your permission, monsieur. Certainly. De Raoul, wrote the Comte de Guiche, I have an affair in hand which requires immediate attention. I know you have returned. Come to me as soon as possible. Hardly had he finished reading it, when a servant in the livery of the Duke of Buckingham, turning out of the gallery, recognized Raoul and approached him respectfully, saying, From his grace, monsieur. Well, Raoul, as I see you are already as busy as a general of an army, I shall leave you, and will find M. d'Artagnan myself. You will excuse me, I trust, said Raoul. Yes, I excuse you. Adieu, Raoul. You will find me at my apartments until tomorrow. During the day I may set out for Blois, unless I have orders to the contrary. I shall present my respects to you tomorrow, monsieur. As soon as Athos had left, Raoul opened Buckingham's letter. Monsieur de Bragelonne, it ran, you are, of all the Frenchmen I have known, the one with whom I am most pleased. I am about to put your friendship to the proof. I have received a certain message, written in very good French. As I am an Englishman, I am afraid of not comprehending it very clearly. The letter has a good name attached to it, and that is all I can tell you. Will you be good enough to come and see me? For I am told you have arrived from Blois. Your devoted, Vere, Duke of Buckingham. "I am going now to see your master," said Raoul to the Guise servant, as he dismissed him, "and I shall be with the Duke of Buckingham in an hour." He added, dismissing with these words the Duke's messenger,